Good morning, everybody. I hope you guys are doing all right. Let me cut this off. So I will. There we are. I'm going to sit here and sweat for you like I've been doing for the last week or so. I hope you guys are doing all right. This is Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is obviously somewhat Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. We have a damn good show for you today. The first hour is going to be a lot of news to go through. And your humble host is going to be the one who's going to take you through that news. That is why I was late. It is very intricate. And because it's very intricate, I had to kind of effectively write everything down because I don't want to necessarily miss anything. There's a lot of news that is taking place, and it's a lot of news that's taking place all at once. As you know, we had the protests that were in Indonesia. Those seem to have settled down. The Nepali government has utterly and entirely collapsed in flames, effectively with the public taking over, the government burning down the parliamentary buildings, burning down politicians' houses. I think up to either 19 or 22 people were killed. It's just chaos. France, chaos. The government fell yesterday with the no confidence vote. Francois, I think it's Bayrou, is out. And Macron has already appointed another successor. That successor is going to face a no confidence vote almost immediately. This is the third prime minister that Macron had to choose over the course of, 1 year, I think? 3 prime ministers in less than a year. So that is the situation of France. There is a protest that is taking place all across France. I think they call it Block Everything Movement. Shut it down. Now, France does protests extraordinarily well. I've seen them bring cows into the middle of the road when the farmers were pissed off. In this case, they are going pretty hard at the cops, and they are in a complete rejection of Macron choosing effectively a clone of the prime minister that just failed miserably and just got sent his walking papers. So there's very much. There's another story taking place about Poland where they are claiming that a Russian drone was flying in their airspace, in which case they're screaming for Article 4, not 5. Article 4 is, I guess, consultation. All of this while von der Leyen is giving some kind of speech about European security and militarization of Europe. Now, this seems to be very coincidental. Very coincidental. So much so that the whole false flag thing starts to float into the mind space and looking at what is effectively taking place. So, Qatar is probably the story we want to start with. I hit this a little bit yesterday, but we were on the tail end of the show when this story effectively came out. Israel, lured by Donald Trump, and yes, I'm going to say lured, bombed Doha, Qatar, with the goal of trying to murder the Hamas leadership. Now, apparently, several people were killed. They did not necessarily get everybody, but of course, this is causing an international scandal, to put it mildly, which on some level kind of mystifies me. Israel has been murdering people en masse for the last 2 years. And now, all of a sudden, people are shocked that a country that has been working and operating with impunity has decided to continue to operate with impunity and attack Doha. That's weird to me. The prime minister comes out, gives the speech effectively saying all options are on the table. We reserve the right to attack. Trump is saying that they gave them a warning in advance. The prime minister is saying that is not the case, that he did not get a warning in advance, that he was told after the fact when it was effectively too late. Either way, it's amazing to me that these quisling governments, and by the way, flexing the military prowess after they got attacked. Now, if Trump is right, which who knows, right? You effectively got hit by Israel, and you're flexing your muscles after the fact you got hit by Israel. I can't necessarily tell whether this is purely for the public consumption of Qatar, or meaning, because you can imagine there are going to be a lot of angry people that their sovereignty has effectively been fundamentally, irrecoverably violated. Now the catch becomes, what do you do about it? Donald Trump apparently patted him on the head, said, hey, don't worry about this. It won't happen again. It won't happen again. And the only thing you have to believe is the habitual liar that effectively lured Hamas there to discuss the deal that Donald Trump had on the table and then tried to murder that same Hamas. I am using the term lured. So Axios is reporting that Donald Trump is very upset. He's fuming. He's fuming about Israel bombing Hamas in Qatar. Doesn't this have kind of this energy of Joe Biden is very angry that Israel went into Rafah? Joe Biden is working tirelessly with all of these other things that are taking place. It's nonsense. They were there to review a deal, an agreement that Donald Trump put on the table. This is simultaneously with Donald Trump screaming that there's going to be all hell to pay if that deal is not necessarily accepted. So you create pressure, you send them to negotiate or to look at the deal that you go through, and then Israel all of a sudden bombs that particular location. I don't think it's a coincidence. If you look back at Soleimani, he was also going for a peace negotiation when Trump murdered him. If you look at what took place with Israel, where they were going for peace negotiations, when Israel tried a decapitation strike that the United States obviously knew about, because you could see Donald Trump tweets immediately after, up until the point where it became clear that Israel was getting his clock cleaned. This is Trump's MO. Habitual liars lie. Flat fact. It's as real as gravity at this point. So yes, when I look at the situation and I say Trump put a deal on the table, they go to negotiate the deal, and all of a sudden you have a strike that effectively tries to murder everybody that's there. There's some rumor, that I'll call it, that Turkey gave a heads up at the last minute, which allowed some of them to effectively save their lives. I don't know if that's true or not. The prime minister of Qatar seems to be very upset, whether that's for public consumption or otherwise, who knows? It is fascinating to me that he is this upset, and I'm going to explain why. This is, let me see, do I have a video of the attack itself? I think I have a video of the attack itself also, if you give me a moment. But this is the prime minister, very angry, humiliated. Apparently he believed he was different than Syria, Iran, Gaza, Lebanon. Apparently he thought he was different. I don't know why. You have two racist governments. Why do you think these racist governments are going to see you, Arab, Muslim, any different than they see the other Arab Muslims that they have been murdering, starving, raping, imprisoning for the last several years? Why? I don't know. This is him. A speech where he is pointing out that options are on the table and that the other governments should get involved in order to push back on Israel's behavior.
The state of Qatar is committed to act in a decisive way with anything that would target its territories, and will reserve the right to retaliate, and will take all the needed measures to retaliate. And under the directives of His Highness the Emir, the security of the citizens and the residents is our top priority. And based on that, as of tomorrow, God willing, we will review all the policies and the directives in order to deter such actions and measures in the future, so that it cannot happen again. And this will be also the committee will be headed by State Minister Mohammed Al Khalifi, who will take all the needed measures in order to retaliate and to respond to this attack, against this attack. The Israeli attack that took place today in the state of Qatar, we can only call it as a state terrorism that is being exerted by someone like Netanyahu, given his attempts and his policies as he tries to threaten the regional security. This is only a clear message to the whole region, and this message says that there is one player, and there's also a disrespect to all the policies and also a violation to the sovereignty of all the countries and the states. Netanyahu said himself that he will reshape the Middle East. Does he mean that he's also going to reshape the Gulf region? I think that we have reached a decisive moment. There should be a retaliation from the whole region.
Right there. Right there. Right there. There should be retaliation for the whole region. Now, when I heard that, I thought to myself, well, that's special. That's pretty amazing, right? Put this in context. The Gulf states have watched Israel commit mass murder. They have watched Israel starve, rape, kill. They have watched Israel take shots for fun at starving human beings, ghostly skeletal human beings, while they laughed and joked and took pop shots at various people. They laughed as they were shooting kids in the genitals intentionally. This is what they were effectively doing for fun. They were murdering, quote unquote, dangerous babies. They were bombing tents. They were doing all of this stuff. They were doing this stuff for 3 years while the Gulf states watched. 2 years. And the Gulf states watched. Didn't break relationships. They kept their relationships. Hell, they were even going to sign the Abraham Accords. They watched as Syria, and paid for, by the way, as Syria was overthrown. And as a head chopper, went about ethnically cleansing other Muslims and Christians, Alawites, etc., in Syria. They watched. They didn't have much to say about it. They watched. They watched as Lebanon was bombed and people killed, and Lebanon was occupied and invaded. They watched all of this stuff. They watched as Iran was hit. Didn't necessarily have much to say about that either. But now, now, this is an issue for the region, and we should respond accordingly. That's pretty amazing. So you can watch a genocide. You can watch all of these other people get murdered. You can watch Arab Muslims get slaughtered. And you can do so for years while also maintaining a relationship with Israel and tightening that relationship. But now that your country was bombed because you thought that you were somehow special, you thought you were somehow unique, as opposed to two racist, one racist prime minister, one racist president, looking at you like they look at every other Arab, expendable. Why did you think you were different? Why? And what is this unity now that you've apparently come to where you believe that all of the other states should get involved? None of you got involved when all of these other people were being murdered. What has transpired now where you now all of a sudden Muslims should rise up and fight Netanyahu? That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. Donald Trump pat him on the head. It's okay. Just calm down. Just calm down. Don't overstress it. It won't happen again. It's okay. I'm fascinated by that speech. I really am. It's almost astonishing. How do you make a speech like that as you've watched all of these other people get killed and slaughtered in your region while working with the genocidal regime that was effectively doing it, or at the very least didn't necessarily take a hard stance against the genocidal regime that was doing it? Sure, they would write a strongly worded letter, and sure, they would go out, give a speech, and then get back in their limo and eat their bonbons, but nothing real, nothing tangible. And yes, I'm saying this as a citizen of the country that is effectively backing this deranged sociopathy with my tax dollars. So I do get it. But whether my country is doing it or not is secondary to the point that their countries is also allowing it. It's amazing to me that all of a sudden now you want to universalize the issue when up to this point, each one has been specific and you had nothing to do with it, using this realist logic of, my name is Bennett, I ain't in it. I give a strongly worded letter, I'll condemn it, but I'm not necessarily going to do anything to push back on it. And now when it's become clear that your sovereignty was never a given, that your sovereignty has been ruthlessly violated, now you take issue. That's amazing. That's amazing. Whether they were given a heads up in the way that Trump says, or whether it was told too late, I don't know. The truth of the matter is, obviously, U.S. air defense didn't do anything about the attack. They weren't protected in any particular way. And apparently, their own air defense, or whatever defenses that they have at their disposal, whatever weapons that were used, Israel was able to effectively get in without triggering any of those things. It has even crossed my mind that they might have been in on it. I mean, they would have the exact same reaction if they were effectively in on it, right? So who knows? I don't necessarily know. I'm just pointing out that this kind of flexing your military might after you've been violated. And if indeed this was a situation where you were effectively told in advance, that makes it even worse. It's like, you got cucked, then claiming you didn't when everybody watched the video on OnlyFans. How are you making this case? How are you making this argument? I understand the rage. You should have rage. I understand, the animosity, the anger, the humiliation. I get all that. And I would imagine that your population is also very angry, in which case you need to emote this in order to curb some of the anger from the population itself. But it's a bit rich that you've watched all of these people get slaughtered for years. You had no concerns. And now all of a sudden that you got hit, you want to bring in everybody else to your cause. This was the hit that took place right here. This was the hit that took place in Doha. This, and this.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Sana hindi pumani yung kotse. Oh my God.
Now, the world, or at the very least the world, according to Al Jazeera, is freaking out over this, outraged over this. And again, I'm a bit bewildered as to why. We, as a world, supported by the U.S., fully supported by the U.S., with the rest of the world effectively being genocide enablers also because they've continued support for Israel and kept their relationship and trade relationships and deals and everything else, but fully supported by the U.S., fully supported by Europe wholeheartedly. We have watched them go from one country to the next, bombing and killing. We've watched them kill women and children with impunity. We've watched them invade other countries with impunity. They're occupying Syria and parts of Lebanon right now as we speak. We have let them commit a genocide with complete and utter impunity. Why do we believe that that impunity would stop there? And is it possible that when you can commit actions in the way that you've committed actions that are so ghastly and horrific without any kind of pushback, within any kind of consequence, real world consequence, that maybe you feel that there are no limits? And if you indeed feel that there are no limits, what does it matter if you bomb Qatar? Especially if Qatar doesn't do anything about it. If you don't do anything about it, you've set a precedent that your sovereignty is up to the whims of foreign actors. The US being one, Israel being the other. Obviously, the US greenlit this attack. I think beat within an inch of his life. Fast forward from the finance minister being taken out. This is that same finance minister. After they got their hands on him, being dragged through the streets. Again, trigger warning. This is chaos. This is just chaos. To make this even worse, let's keep going with the story. And I'll explain why this is taking place in a moment. I just want to give context to what's going on. This is the Parliament building. Now, again, 22 people, 19 to 22 people dead, hundreds injured. Prime Minister Ali resigned. Many of the other parliamentary members, or let's say politicians, had to be escorted or ferreted away because the mob was trying to get their hands on them. The president has not resigned. The president has not resigned. The military has taken up a posture in the country itself to try to resume order in the country because looting, robbings, killings, etc., just utter and complete mayhem. It seems that the public itself has effectively taken over the government. Now, on top of that, as I pointed out, the finance minister barely gets out. I don't know if he's alive or dead at this point. Here's another situation where they burn the former prime minister's house to the ground. And they are celebrating as they do it. To make this one even worse, again, trigger warning on this. Why is this happening? On the surface, there are mantras of corruption. There are mantras of, immiseration. Apparently, they're going with this thing of Nepo kids, that this is what do they call it? A Gen Xer protest. I want to make sure I get it right. There we are. The name of, I guess, that they were going with in regards to the protest was Gen Z protests. I'm sorry, Gen Z protests. And part of the thing that they were protesting was this thing called Nepo kids. Now, videos, and just to back up for a moment, Nepal's government told social media companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., like any other country, you need to follow our laws. Social media companies told Nepal to F off. So Nepal passed a law limiting those companies. The moment that law was passed, all hell broke loose, and the Gen Zer protests erupted. It started off small. It grew almost immediately at lightning speed, and it went all throughout the country itself, up until the point where what you saw, burning down parliamentary buildings, burning down politicians' houses, killing, beating politicians to within an inch of his life, burning that woman alive, not to mention all sorts of violence, looting, and everything else. It erupted seemingly out of the blue, and apparently initiated by the whole social media issue. It then became this notion of immiseration of the working class. Immiseration, poverty, corruption became the mantras that started coming out of this particular protest. Videos such as this start showing on social media. Now, what these videos show are effectively the difference between the lives of, let's say, the elites in the country versus the lives of everyone else. Effectively saying, Nepo kids, look at how this nepotism in regards to these kids, look how these people are living. And this is obviously a case of corruption. While we are struggling, we are having a difficult time with unemployment. We are having a difficult time finding jobs. We have to leave the country in order to find jobs. This is outrageous. Meaning what you started off with as a social media protest eventually became this kind of broader protest about the way the country is run and the corruption in the country. And much of it was spurred on by videos such as this.
you thanks, but he gonna tell you that love.
I think you see the point. I think you see the point. Hey, look at how these rich people are living. Look how we're living. Why is this right? Now, the people on the ground would say this is organic. We are showing agency. This is an uprising. And we're taking our government back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have all these mantras and everything else. You have all of these signs that are in English. And to be fair, many people in Nepal actually speak English. So a little weird, but is what it is. Let's go with it. The problem with the argument that this is entirely organic is when you look at who is funding this and where this came from. So if you go to Al Jazeera, they say the following, this line is important. Dubbed the Gen Z protest, it was organized by the nonprofit organization Hami Nepal, meaning we are Nepal. According to Kathmandu District Administration Office, the NGO had secured approval for it. The protest spread to other cities. Now, who is Hamdi Nepal? Let's look that up, or Hami Nepal. If you look up Hami Nepal, and shout out to Brian Berletti for this, because he did great work as normal. You get this group. If you click on this, it will take you to this website. That's very nice. If you go down to the bottom of the website and say, who is supporting this work? Meaning, how do you get money to do what you do? Okay, well, you have Coca-Cola. All right, that's an American company. And then you have this. Okay, well, what is this? If you click on it, studentsforfreetibet.org. Studentsforfreetibet.org. All right. I'm not going to open that because that's going to take forever to open. I will go through, however, National Endowment for Democracy. National Endowment for NGO, powered by the United States in order to accomplish U.S. objectives. And if you come down, what do you have? Students for Free Tibet. And you also have Students for Free Tibet, Inc. These are groups that, at the very least back in 2019, were effectively funded by the National Endowment for Democracy to accomplish ostensibly anti-China objectives, if you're going with this notion of a quote-unquote free Tibet. When people, oh, you can't see that. Hold on. You didn't, okay, let's go back to it. This. Students for Free Tibet, Inc. and Students for Free Tibet, Inc. National Endowment for Democracy. It gives context. So, immiseration of the working class, people are very angry, people are very upset. You have this shadowy group, NGO, that comes in funding the protests, inflaming the protests in a particular way. And just so happened that the group is getting money from the US government to affect certain agendas. Now, if you are on the street and you're very pissed off, it doesn't mean your anger isn't real. It doesn't mean that you don't have a bunch of righteous indignation. It doesn't mean you don't have a point. It does not mean one iota that you don't have a right to be upset about the way your government operates, or for that matter, the way the rich lives versus the way you live. By the same token, if you're being turned in a particular way to burn down parliament, to kill your political figures, to go after politicians and everything else in the way that the government operates, meaning you're going after institutions of state, then you kind of have to ask, why are you being pushed in that direction? It's part of it. Is part of the reason this? The relationship between Nepal and China. Nepal signs a deal on Belt and Road, paving the way for progress on projects. Around this time, you have Victoria Nuland that had visited Nepal, trying to force Nepal to basically make a choice to choose the United States over China. Choose us, don't choose them. And lo and behold, now you have consequences. Just because there's a fault line in a society doesn't mean that that fault line is not real. The fault line is real. All things being equal, though, it's almost like external actors use those fault lines in order to accomplish their own objectives, inflame those fault lines, push them in a particular way. The idea that you go from social media to burning down a parliament building in 24 hours is pretty astonishing. That is an amazing thing. And you have to wonder to yourself, why are you doing that? There are videos of these guys, even when they're going into parliamentary buildings, pulling out guns and at that point being armed as they're going through the streets in their protests. Not saying that the feeling isn't real. Not saying that they don't have a good point. I am saying that this seems to be engineered and pushed in a particular direction for particular reasons. Now the catch becomes, who's going to be the next president? Now some of the people want the mayor. I don't know if the mayor even wants to take the particular job. But what typically happens is that the guy that comes in the office, coincidentally, of course, just so happens to have a particular tenor of the world that was somewhat different than the tenor of the last guy that had the job. We'll see if that's the case. Obviously, Nepal has a close relationship with China. Yes, there's a Himalayan mountain, so that's kind of difficult to get over. And yes, there were difficulties with earthquakes. There was difficulties with India at a certain point. But in the context of the Belt and Road Initiative, you can imagine that the United States wants to put the kibosh on China's, let's say, reach in the region. And if you could destroy the integrity of a government and make it look like a actual uprising and a revolution, then you do it. It's just a color revolution. We've seen it over and over again. We saw it in Indonesia. We saw it in Ukraine. We saw it in Georgia, or at the very least, the attempt in Georgia. We see these things all over the world in situations where the U.S. is trying to affect a particular agenda, or let's say some external entity is trying to affect a particular agenda. I just want to nail something down. What time is it? Before I move on to the next point. Two things can be true at once. People can be legitimately upset. People can be legitimately pissed off. People can have every reason to be pissed off in the way that the government operates. But who's paying for it? In the direction that they're trying to take it does matter. That's not a nothing. That's not irrelevant. And if indeed you have what seems to be, let's say, U.S. influence in covering and paying for the protests, and the protests have escalated to the point where people are being murdered, people are being dragged through the streets, people are being burned alive, and you are attacking elements of state, meaning parliamentary buildings, et cetera, don't you have to ask why? And how did it get to that particular point? I get the anger, I get the rage, but Jesus, the motives of the people who are paying you does matter, at the very least in this context, for these protests, especially when you have them up to this point. The military is asserting control, and the military has put a curfew in effect. They've spoken, effectively saying they regret all of the stuff. This is pretty horrendous. But at this point, they have started patrolling the streets themselves. And we'll see. Ali, the president or the prime minister stepping down, in no way stemmed the protests. They just kept going at this point. So we will see if Nepal falls back under a certain amount of control. We will see who the prime minister is going to end up being at the end of all of this, whether that guy's going to have a certain tenor that is going to be, let's say, tilted away from something like the Belt and Road Initiative, or whether that guy's going to continue with the direction that he's going. I am trying to nail down this point, though, that I'm not trying to undercut what people are feeling in this. I'm trying to point to, are you being led in a particular direction? And again, after watching this in Ukraine, after watching this in Georgia, and you get all of these kids who know nothing about politics, they know nothing about, how this stuff actually shakes out in the real world in regards to how countries leverage rage, anger to accomplish larger geopolitical objectives. What they know is we're pissed off. We feel like we're being screwed over. They are getting over in regards to corruption, and we need to burn this place down. And they did. And they did. So there's that. The other one is France. Do we have enough time for France? Yes, we have enough time for France. Chocolat bleu. Prime Minister calls a no confidence vote. The Prime Minister knows he's going to lose that no confidence vote. Calls it anyway, gets crushed. France falls. Now, after France falls, Macron chooses another prime minister almost immediately. That prime minister, Sebastian, I think this is Lecornu, is going to face a no confidence vote almost immediately. He is the same ilk, the same type of person that just failed miserably. And I would imagine this guy is also going to fail miserably pretty quickly. Macron has been doing a sleight of hand. The Renaissance Party is deeply unpopular. Macron has like a 15% approval rating. And when they were doing horse trading in order to prevent National Rally, Marie Le Pen's party, from taking over, what you ended up with was a left-wing party that had more votes. Macron, however, it was still a divided parliament. Macron turns around and says, well, I'm going to bring in somebody who I like, who's kind of like me for my party, despite the fact that my party got crushed in the elections. And he keeps doing it over and over and over again. So the crisis that France has in regards to debt and all of these other things, while they continuously still send money to Ukraine and increase the defense budget, doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And they're trying to leverage that on the backs of the poor and the working class. All right. So the French public is pissed. And when the French public is pissed, they have a tendency to shut shit down. So in France, you get scenes like this. Damn it, wrong one. Like this. These cops are having a very bad day.
Yep.
Of course, they were burning tires, blocking highways, or at the very least blocking some roadways. And France mobilized 80,000 cops to deal with the situation all across the country, knowing full well that this was going to be an issue. It was called, I'm trying to get the name of it, Block Everything Movement. Up to this point, 200 people have been arrested. There may be more at this point. I haven't watched the story just for a bit since I've been on air. Macron has already handed over leadership to the other person, meaning there's already been a handover to the new prime minister. There's other protests. I mean, there's other things that are taking place. It's not just the cops getting beat up. Here is another location. This one is in Marseille. More people out on the streets, angry, cantankerous, effectively saying, we have been slapped in the face by Macron for choosing the same rando person that just left. Here is another scene, a little bit more aggressive. Again, this is just chaos. This is just chaos. I told you, man, France knows how to have a protest. They know how to have a protest. I was there when they brought all of these cows on the middle of the highway in order to block the roadways because the farmers were pissed off about something or another. And when they say we are going to shut it down, they actually mean we're going to shut it down. And again, on some level, They have reason to. If you are a German citizen, for example, you are sitting at home, living your life, eating your croissants or whatever you're eating as a German citizen, eating your sausage. And you see Merz come on TV and say, A, we're in a recession. B, we need to keep sending money and weapons to Ukraine. D, we need to cut your benefits. And E, mass layoffs for various parts of the German economy. How are you going to take that? Do you absorb that well? And if you're France and you hear Macron effectively saying, hey, we need to continuously send weapons to Ukraine and send money and spend all of this cash on Ukraine. B, we need to cut your social benefits because, you guys get too much. You have too many nice things. And C, we're going to do that by having massive cuts in the budget as we continuously send more weapons to Ukraine, a war that you may not even care about or necessarily want to be involved in. You may not take that well. And you have a right not to take that well. You are fixing your budgetary issues on the backs of the poor, just like they were doing the fuel tax when they effectively tried to increase the cost of fuel on the backs of the poor. And they were going to do that, which was the cause of the Yellow Vest movement. If you remember, that's how that started, where it started to gain more and more energy with massive support from the majority of the public, effectively forcing the government to back down on those policies. So we will see what that turns out to be. I will take bets on how long the government lasts of this new guy. And many people are calling for something fundamentally different. Like they're calling for a new government. Like we need to move in a different direction. This doesn't work. The way that we've been operating up to this point has utterly and entirely failed. We need something different. Immiseration of the working class. That's one of the ways to get people out on their ass, right? The thing is, with the United States, that doesn't seem to be enough to do it for whatever particular reason. But in France, maybe it's because they had nice things and you're trying to take away their nice things. Whereas the US, you didn't really have nice things to begin with. So I don't know. I don't know. I will say that is utter and entire chaos. You went from the government falling to now just chaos in the streets. We'll see how long that lasts. I mean, that's a hell of a tempo for them to have to be able to keep going. And to call up 80,000 cops, I'm not quite sure how long you can keep 80,000 cops on the streets all across France. I mean, France is already in a budgetary issue. They're 5.8% over their budget. I think they're 3 trillion in, like they have a deficit of like 3 trillion. Now, yes, if you're the United States and you're at 36 trillion, you would kill for that budget, right? But the economies are radically different. And the European Union usually only has a 3% difference. France is not a sovereign currency. So it's not like the United States where they own their currency or many of these other countries like Japan or something like that. They get euros. Euros don't come from France. Euros come from the central bank of Europe. So yeah, they have the difficulties that they need to resolve. And up to this point, the prime minister who is coming in now will most likely try to do something very similar in regards to push through the legislation that was massively unpopular with the last guy and cause that last guy to get chucked. So we'll see how long it lasts. Like I said, France has gone through 3 prime ministers in a year. 3 in 1 year. And I strongly suspect this guy's going to be a 4th. We will see. We will see. We have chats. Let's go to the chat before my guest comes on. Let's see. Motless X. What the fuck is Saudi Arabia complaining about? Israel had to use their airspace. I assume they allow Israel to do it. Yes. Hence my point. Like, for example, Turkey, Erdogan. Erdogan would say, Netanyahu's like Hitler. Okay, well, you're still giving gas to Hitler. You worked with Hitler to take down Syria. Let's be honest, right? When Iran was attacked, these countries were softball assisting Israel and its attacks on Iran. What are you guys complaining about? You were perfectly okay when Israel was murdering Muslims and Arabs in Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, West Bank, etc. Now you take issue because for whatever particular reason you thought you were different. And now you're coming to this kind of ontological shock where you realize, oh, wait, the racist government in America and the racist government in Israel sees us as the same animals, quote unquote, as they see the people that they've been killing all along. Yes, they don't see you any different. Regardless of your self-perception, they don't see you any different. You're fair game, you're expendable, and most likely Greater Israel is going to run through your cities and your countries also. You allowed Israel to pick off one country after the next, and now you're effectively screaming for some level of cooperation and support to push back on Israel's aggression. I think what they know in their heart of hearts is if you don't respond, you've set a precedent where you will remain fair game going forward. Agreed. And this one, Nepal is perfectly located between India and China. What a leverage point, similar to how Azerbaijan is located between Russia and Iran. Yes. Yeah, I've seen someone make the argument that why would the United States effectively do this? Well, I mean, if you have a situation where you have, let's say, the Belt and Road going through Nepal because of its location, strategic location, and then you get them to change tenor, kind of like Malay on the whole BRICS thing, where all of a sudden Argentina pulls out of BRICS. Would that affect what they're trying to accomplish? Yes. Yes. The interesting question is who's going to be the new prime minister in Nepal? That's going to be a super interesting question. And I do not have an answer for that question in the least. But that is going to be a super interesting question. My guest is coming up shortly, so there's no point in going into another story, even though I really want to go into the UFO stuff. In fact, I'll go into it while I'm waiting on him. And just let me see. Can I show this? Can I show this? Can I show this? Oh, I don't know where it is. I don't know where it is. Damn, I don't know where it is. I have a promo thing when I do UFO content, like a little me being abducted in effigy. I don't know where it is right now, so I can't necessarily just pull it up. We had a congressional UFO conference that took place yesterday. I have to be honest, it's a bit dry. And I'm not going to go into the UFO stuff because I know some of you are going to roll your eyes. What I would ask you, though, is to check your cynicism at the door. Everything I'm saying is perfectly true. I never go beyond the point that I can't necessarily defend. And in this case, anything that I'm going to say in this moment is accurate. I just want to nail it down. Watching a UFO hearing for Congress is pretty wild to me. In the old days, it would be a shocking thing if Congress engaged this topic seriously. And for all intents and purposes, you had the military and the Gilgo factor that was associated with it. The Director of National Intelligence comes out with their report and points out these are real objects. This is physical matter and they're not swamp gas, interdimensional fish, or anything like that. These are real. Fast forward, you get Lou Elizondo releasing all of these videos coming out of ATIP, which was a minor program. The larger program was AWAS. But Lou Elizondo coming out of ATIP goes on CNN after working in this black budget project studying UFOs, says, we are not alone. There's something else here. It's not us. It's something else. Now, you would think that if somebody who studied this stuff for the government in a black budget project comes out, is very cagey with their words because he can still be arrested if he says something that goes off script. But you would think if somebody says, we are not alone, yes, I've studied this stuff for years for the US government, that would have impact. But instead, they went to a Pepsi commercial and they moved on. And I'm sitting there looking at this like, whoa, what just happened? What's profound about it was, yes, what he said, but was also the audience reaction to what he said, which was, that's interesting. And then they had sex with their wife or their girlfriend, played their Xbox, went to their jobs. Something fundamental and radical has been dropped in the lap of America. And the response to it was so muted that it left me with this question of what the hell just happened? David Grush, and I have a point with this. David Grush also, again, I worked in the black budget area. I've talked to these people. These people were working on craft. We do have downcraft, and we have biologicals. As a flat fact, they're not us. It's something else. I've been behind the scenes. I've seen it. I know it's true. And I'm telling you, as the American public, the same thing. Now, again, you would think that this would be a mind-blowing revelation, considering the guy was in the position to do all of this stuff. Another point with Lou Elizondo. When Lou Elizondo released those videos, it wasn't just the videos. If you remember, when he was going over the Nimitz incident, Lou Elizondo brought out the pallets that were there, Dietrich, Fravor, the ship, radar information, meaning this story is concrete as stone. Fravor was flying on 9/11. He is unimpeachable as a witness. Dietrich was also in the plane looking at the object as they were flying around the object, seeing this thing that they couldn't necessarily pin down. How it was flying, they had no idea. Flight characteristics, no idea. All of this stuff was odd. And the moment that they tried to move in close to it, it's gone in an instant. And shows up at the checkpoint that they're supposed to show up at. Okay, you have radar, you have human sighting, you have all sorts of telemetry on the object. The radar brought them to the object, which is how they knew the object was there in the first place. There were people who were on the ship who saw the object hanging over the water before it took off. The story is unimpeachable. And yet the audience, the world, interesting. Had sex with their mistress, played their Xbox, went to their jobs. That's not fascinating? Yes, what is being dropped is profound, but there's this other effect that's taking place that I am fascinated by. And I think I'm calling it the cognitive gap. I think the issue, if this was back in the 80s, people would be wowed by it. And many people who were in the UFO field would have killed to have that information effectively put out like that. But that's not the way it works today. There's a huge amount of cynicism that's kind of built into our political space. Fair enough, it's earned. But the other thing to that is the cognitive gap. You are telling the public something that is so profound, that is so mind-blowing, and that so reshapes the bounds of their reality. How are they to digest it? How do you digest that without having something that is more tangible and more real that you can put into their face and say, hey, I know this guy's showing this. I know all of these people have witnessed to it. Here's a video of something that's going Mach 10 and then makes a right turn. And even then, what they would probably say is that's AI. It's too big. It's too profound. It's so big and so profound that the implications of it, the gravity of it, creates a situation where you need something more than just what a person is saying, what a video is showing, or what people who are there behind the scenes are pointing out. It's too much of a radical shift in people's reality to be able to accept it under normal terms. It's kind of like the value of a dollar. You know the value of a dollar because you use a dollar. You may even weigh things in the context of a dollar. Hell, you may even weigh items. That car costs X amount. That desk costs X amount. That whatever costs X amount. You get it on a gut level, even though a dollar is esoteric and it's in reality. How do you process something like that? When you find that physics is incomplete, when you find that you are not alone, and then you get into some of the other weirder stuff of the implications of it that are even more profound than that. Issues of consciousness, issues of abductions, issues of infrastructure, Meaning, one of the questions that I had the opportunity to ask Lou Elizondo was, well, those ships don't seem to be flying from another planet. So where are they coming from? And Elizondo was like, that's a good question. You're going to get me in trouble. And he sheepishly backed away from having to answer that particular question. I'm trying to say that these UFO hearings are interesting, but they're never going to give the bang for the buck that we require, even if they say something that is explosive, and even if they say something that is mind-blowing. I've yet to hear anything go beyond anything that Elizondo, or for that matter, David Crusher said. And if those were ignored, then these hearings, short of providing some level of massive evidence, are mostly going to be ignored by the public. And that is a shame. That is a shame. There are political implications, severe political implications. If you are dealing with Europe, if you're dealing with the United States, Joe Biden comes out and says, Russia wants to take over all of Ukraine. They just, Putin's just a bad guy. I looked in his heart and he was evil. We are the good guys. We're freedom and justice. We're love and light. Russia blew up his own pipeline. Obviously, these things are lies, right? It didn't stop the US president from telling these lies over and over and over again. Donald Trump pretends as if he's in negotiations with Iran, then turns around and tries a decapitation strike using his rogue actor or proxy to do it. Donald Trump pretends as if he's in negotiations with Hamas, turns around, uses his proxy to try to murder the Hamas members. Trump is a habitual liar. He lies as easily as he breathes. How, in a context like this, where you have world leaders that are flagrant liars, how do you trust anything that comes out on the subject matter? And by the way, this is not even a subject matter where you are in a situation where you can inspect it for yourself. You can see what is coming out of Ukraine. You can see the numbers of casualties. You can see the graveyards. You can see all of that stuff. So if they're telling you, yeah, we only lost 8,000 people this year, I was like, dude, are you being serious right now? How do you do that when something is radically in the black? How do you do that? And your trust in what is coming out and something that is profound, that is radical, is entirely tethered to habitual liars. That is massive implications. And I don't know a way around that. I don't even know how to get past that. What's wild, or even wilder, is even if they did come out with the truth, would the public even believe them? Cynicism has been etched to such a degree in the way that we deal with our government. It is very possible that they can come out and say, here's a body, here's a thing, kick the tires. We're not alone. And the public will still say, I think that guy's lying. I think that guy's lying. There's so many implications that are associated with it. And yeah, these hearings are nice. These hearings are interesting. Every so often there's a nugget that comes out in these hearings. I've been at some of the UFO hearings where they talked about the nuclear weapons and how UFOs was flying around the nuclear weapons and then shut off the weapons. One of the guards outside freaking out, losing his mind. Robert Elias running that particular facility, and weapon after weapon after weapon started to shut down. It wasn't just his, it was multiple UFO sites or nuclear sites, not just in the United States, also in Russia, that these things were effectively happening to. This is something that is a worldwide phenomenon. And for better or for worse, we're being lied to. What's interesting is why. What's also interesting is why are they coming out with this information now? I don't have an answer for either one of those things. But if you find out that, hey, there's a base that's down the street from your house, what do you think about that? How do you deal with that, right? If you find out that, wait a minute, this stuff is true, and then people who said that they were abducted, okay, then what? And then it gets weirder when you find out that the abductions may not have been physical, but they were consciousness-based, like OBEs, those type of things. Your reality has gotten far weirder, almost overnight. And I think what it boils down to, just to close it, is that people will have a hard time reconciling that new reality because that reality is so big. And so regardless of who comes out and says, I have gold from heaven and the UFO thing is real. Here's a video of this UFO thing. Here's a video of this or that. It's so big that it requires something far more substantial, far more radical, in order to orient the public around the subject matter in a way where they start to accept it in a way that you would accept the value of $1. And I got to be honest, I don't know how that works. Yeah. I am fascinated by the subject matter. I used to cover it for my show. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to David. He's usually rock solid. I hit him after the show. In a few minutes, Dan Kovalik is going to come on, and we're going to talk about what took place in Qatar. Because, again, that has turned out to be a very, very big deal. And we will see if there are going to be political consequences of that in a way that, I got to be honest, for me, is kind of unforeseeable in the moment. I don't believe that Qatar is going to do anything. I don't believe Saudi Arabia is going to do anything. I think they'll complain, but I think that's going to be the bulk and the breadth of whatever they're going to effectively do. The other story that is making really big headlines is Poland. Now, I saw the story as I was getting situated for the show. And so I don't have full breadth of any new developments on the story, but I can give the basic outline of what is taking place. So Poland is saying that Russia was flying drones over Poland, that there was some kind of drone attack over Polish airspace. Now, if you remember, this happened once before, where there were drones apparently that hit Poland, killed 2 farmers or something to that effect. They were Ukrainian drones, or they were Ukrainian missiles. They didn't belong to Russia. But the fear at the time was that they would just say, these are Russians missiles. Again, Europe has been lying as easily as it breathes. And so there would have been nothing necessarily stopping it from effectively running with that particular idea. But now this is a little bit different. Daddy seems to be losing interest in what is taking place in Europe. The new Pentagon plan, that's assuming that the Pentagon plan is accepted, has Daddy pulling out of Europe and leaving Europe to deal with the Russians themselves. We'll give you advice. We'll sell you weapons at a 10% markup, but all things being equal, you have to effectively deal with the Russians. And so von der Leyen goes out, gives a speech. And it's effectively about militarization of Europe. Now, this is as their economies burn around them, having this argument about militarization of Europe. And then the story comes out right here. I just flip to it, and I'll just read through it and deal with it directly. This is RT. Moscow has dismissed Poland's latest claim that Russian drones breached the country's airspace. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said no evidence has been provided linking the UAVs to Russia. On Wednesday, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk stated that the country's military had shot down a, quote, huge number of Russian drones, unquote. Warsaw has described the incident as a, quote, unprecedented violation of Polish airspace, unquote, and an, quote, act of aggression, unquote. Accusations pointing out that the EU and NATO leadership across Russia of provocation on a daily basis, most often even without trying to provide any arguments. He further noted that to his knowledge, the Kremlin had not yet received any requests for contact from the Polish leadership over the incident. Meanwhile, Russia charged d'affaires in Warsaw, Andrei Ordash, told RIA Novosti, that when he was summoned to the Polish Foreign Ministry on Wednesday, the Polish authorities did not provide any evidence that the downed UAVs belonged to Russia. He noted that the drones have flown into Poland from Ukraine. So Russia is effectively saying, you guys are making this up. This wasn't the case. And because habitual liars lie, Europe is desperate. They've decided now to go with this idea of Article 4 where they want to be able to talk to NATO and I guess have a brain trust in regards to what they want to do in response to this. Now, this is somewhat dangerous, right? And this was something that on some level was almost expected. There was this belief that Europe may do a false flag in order to try to, let's say, escalate the war in a way. Now, you would think that this would be suicidal. And maybe their thinking is, well, we can pull daddy back into the war if indeed we draw some kind of Article 5 or if we indeed get involved in some kind of direct conflict. I've spoken to some people who made the argument that in their minds, in Europeans' mind, that the United States wouldn't be able to stay out of any kind of conflict that take place in Europe, that they would inevitably, invariably get dragged into some kind of conflict in that way. It seems that the Europeans may be suicidal, though, and that they are trying their very best to feed European citizens, be it Polish, British, French, whatever, into the teeth of the Russian military. Which would happen. Which would happen. We will see how this escalates. But let's be very clear. Ukraine has shot down Russian drones. Obviously, they will have drone parts. Europe is a dishonest actor. They've been dishonest the entire way through. So you add a dishonest actor to another desperate country, and you may get a false flag event that all of them know is nonsense, all of them know is BS, and yet they still run with it nonetheless for political reasons in order to either escalate the conflict or try to drag the United States into the conflict in a direct way. They want daddy to fight the war for them. Question is, does Trump know that? Is Trump smart enough to know that? I do not have an answer for that question. I will say, though, it is very dangerous for Poland to be playing this game. It's very dangerous for Poland to be playing this game. Also, there was something else. Belarus. If I remember correctly, Belarus said that they gave them indications of where the drones were coming from, which is why they were willing to they could shoot them down. Put quotes around the last part because it's on the periphery of my memory. But we'll see where this goes and whether this escalates. And if this does indeed escalate, what's the plan that Europe is trying to run with under this? We will see. We will see. Let me see. There was another story that we can hit before Dan Kovalik comes on. Dan is going to hit the Qatar story. He taught international law. He has studied these issues for decades. I'm very curious on what he thinks is going to happen from here on out. As I said, the media seems to be freaking out over this, which, again, I don't quite get why. I don't know why Qatar thought it was special. I just don't. But apparently, the media did see Qatar as being special. Qatar saw themselves as being special. Well, you have had your N-word wake-up call because obviously Israel does not see you as being anything other than, well, let's say not Jewish. And no different than the people that they've been killing for the last several years. So there is that. I want to hit one more story before, what time is it? Okay, we have 6 minutes. All right. Let's go. Yeah, we did that one. We did Nepal. We did France. We did Qatar. Let's go to I'm not going to touch that one. That one annoys the hell out of me, and I'm going to wait for Sarah on that one. The IAEA has apparently made a deal with Iran where the nuclear inspections, I guess, will resume. Now, to be fair, there's a caveat around that. If sanctions are passed, then the deal is off. From my understanding, Europe is still passing those sanctions. So there's that. I want to hit Venezuela for a moment. because all of this stuff is taking place and the issue of Venezuela is still present. Hegseth visited Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is being used almost as an operating base. They've been doing drills and everything else on Puerto Rico. You have X amount of soldiers and everything else, missiles that can hit Venezuela. Maduro is freaking out and is trying to point out as strenuously as he can, this is effectively weapons of mass destruction once again in the Southern Hemisphere, and that they are going after Venezuela, not because of drugs. I mean, keep in mind, the CIA had a drug running program in the United States for decades, effectively porting drugs into the United States in order to get money for whatever operations they were going with. So the idea that they're going to look at Venezuela and say, hey, we think you have drugs is pretty outrageous. You need to look at the CIA. Or the other point to that, it has to do with the integration between Venezuela, China, and Russia, and even Iran. China has been making a hell of a lot of gains in South America. I mean, they've just built that huge port in Peru. That port is not just going to be isolated to Peru. It's going to be a hub where all sorts of goods and products from China can move all throughout Latin America and South America. The oil that Venezuela has at their disposal. And this was a situation where at one point the United States was passing sanctions where they could effectively try to destroy the Venezuelan economy. Well, Venezuela, with the help of China, has been able to exploit that oil reserve now and make the lives for the people in the country better. You can see it just on the GDP level. So if you're looking at that, you're the US, you have a Pentagon report that says you want to start to re-entrench yourself into the Northern Hemisphere. Venezuela, from your point of view, especially under Monroe Doctrine, is in your hemisphere. You don't have to worry about them having nukes. You don't have to worry about them blowing up your ships. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff that you would get with a peer competitor. And so Trump, in his mind, let's go after Venezuela. Now, whether they are trying a regime change, whether this is about putting pressure, it's not entirely clear at this point. But I would point out this lunatic, Laura Richardson, listen to what she has to say. Because from her point of view, Venezuela, Argentina, all of these places have to do with American interests, meaning America's national security is directly related to these other countries and being able to steal the resources of these other countries. And when you listen to what she's saying, you can put Venezuela in the context of this mindset that seems to be part of the Washington establishment. Let's play a clip.
Talk to my number two adversary in the region, Russia. I mean, I've got, of course, the countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua with Russia relationships. But why this region matters, with all of its rich resources and rare earth elements. You've got the lithium triangle, which is needed for technology today. 60% of the world's lithium is in the lithium triangle: Argentina, Bolivia, Chile. You just have the largest oil reserves, light sweet crude, discovered off of Guyana over a year ago. You have Venezuela's resources as well with oil, copper, gold. We have the Amazon, lungs of the world. We have the 31% of the world's fresh water in this region too. I mean, it's just off the charts. We have a lot to do. This region matters. It has a lot to do with national security, and we need to step up our game. If I talk
I like my monsters to tell me that they're monsters. I love that clip. My man is here. I want to bring him on. We are joined with the man himself, Dan Kovalik. How you doing, Dan? You doing okay today?
I'm hanging in there. How you doing?
I am doing okay. Thank you for showing up. I always appreciate when my guests show up. I think it sucks when they don't. But I reach out to David. He's been pretty consistent up to this point. Dan Kovalik, he's an American human rights, labor rights lawyer, and peace activist. He is also former professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Dan, you are the person I want to talk to today. You're the person I want to talk to. So this clip came out. Qatar attacked during negotiations. Now, I would argue that Hamas was lured into that trap by Donald Trump, who effectively put out an agreement that they were there to look at and mull over. And this is no different than Donald Trump luring Soleimani to get killed, luring the Iranians with quote unquote fake negotiations, where they were once again attacked during those fake negotiations, Donald Trump believing that he could get a decapitation strike using Israel to do it. And now you have a similar situation where Donald Trump threatens, bellyaches, oh, you better take my deal. They go, they look at the deal, and then Israel goes and tries to murder all of them. All right. So this is the strike, just so people can see it. Right here, right here, right here. And I have a question for you after this.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! Sana hindi pumani yung kotse.
All right. So obviously, that's not good. And Doha seems, it's such a just a radical invasion of sovereignty at that point. Now, the prime minister comes out and says this, and I'm amazed by this statement. But effectively, the argument that he's making is, this is outrageous. This is invasion of our territory. And Israel, all of us should work together in order to push back on what Israel is doing. Is it me, or is this a bit rich as an argument to make, considering they've watched and supported Syria being taken down? They've watched Lebanon being invaded. They've watched Gaza, a genocide being committed for all of these years. They watched Iran get hit with soft help to Israel as they hit Iran. And they were going to make diplomatic ties with the Abraham Accords. So how are they now turning around saying, hey, we can use some help dealing with Israel? Give me your take on that. Am I being too much of a hard ass when I'm making that case?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, what happened yesterday is shocking for a lot of reasons. First of all, you had Israel do this, as you say, during peace negotiations, clearly done to destroy the peace negotiations, right? Let's make no mistake about that. And they did it with the U.S.'s blessing. We know that Trump gave his blessing for this, and I agree with you that he lured them, the Hamas delegation there, to meet their death, he had hoped. Meanwhile, you have Saudi Arabia and Jordan, who provided the airspace for Israel to attack Qatar. So the level of complicity here in the attack, in the genocide, the underlying genocide in Gaza is really profound. And it's very troubling. What it shows is, to me, is no one's going to come to the Palestinians' rescue, right? If the world lets this go by without challenge, and it appears that's what's going to happen, then anything goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think that's the message the U.S. and Israel want to send time and time again, is anything goes. They can do anything they want with impunity, and nothing is going to happen to them. And the Arab states, for their part, despite all the things they say about the Palestinians, they are not going to lift a finger to protect them. In fact, they are going to be complicit in their destruction. I mean, that is just a fact.
Yo, I want to play this clip for you, and I want to get your take on this clip, because my point of view was like, this is a bit rich. I listened to him, and I'm sitting here thinking to myself, dude, how are you making this case? Like, because we should put it in context, right? The Gulf states help pay for the destruction of Syria. They help fund that.
Yes. Well, Qatar, first and foremost, they were the key funder of Al Qaeda in Syria, and Al Qaeda was the group that took over. No, Qatar, yeah, no, absolutely, Qatar.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, no, they were they were key, and in fact, in the new book that just came out, my book with Jeremy Kuzmarov, Syria Anatomy of Regime Change. You know, Qatar gets special mention. They did the funding for Al Qaeda when it was, you know, a bit embarrassing for the U.S. to do it directly. But also they have an ideological simpatico with Al Qaeda and have for a long time. But yeah, no, it's an amazing thing.
On top of that, they watched, given, you know, strongly worded statements to Israel murder, rape, starve, shoot Palestinians for years at this point. Meaning, I guess my thing is, at no point were these Gulf states willing to contribute, help, or anything short of a strongly worded statement. And yet, he comes out and he makes this statement now that they got hit. And it's almost to me as if they thought they were somehow special. And I don't quite know why they thought that. This is his statement. It's a little bit long, but I want to get to a very specific point in the statement.
Of Qatar is committed to act in a decisive way with anything that would target its territories, and will reserve the right to retaliate and will take all the needed measures to retaliate. And under the directives of His Highness the Emir, the security of the citizens and the residents is our top priority. And based on that, as of tomorrow, God willing, we will review all the policies and the directives in order to deter such actions and measures in the future so that it cannot happen again. And this will be also the committee will be headed by State Minister Mohammed Al Khalifi, who will take all the needed measures in order to retaliate and to respond to this attack, against this attack. The Israeli attack that took place today in the state of Qatar, we can only call it as a state terrorism that is being exerted by someone like Netanyahu, given his attempts and his policies as he tries to threaten the regional security. This is only a clear message to the whole region. And this message says that there is one player, and there's also a disrespect to all the policies and also a violation to the sovereignty of all the countries and the states. Netanyahu said himself that he will reshape the Middle East. Does he mean that he's also going to reshape the Gulf region?
Yes.
I think that we have...
He already has. He already has.
Should be a retaliation from the whole region.
Right there. He immediately takes it to, is Netanyahu trying to reshape the entire region? And he says there should be retaliation from the entire region. So up to this point, they've had no interest in getting involved on anything. And now it's, hey, we've been attacked. This is outrageous.
Maybe all of us has a military base in Qatar, right? I mean,
yes,
Qatar is a party to all this. And so is Saudi Arabia. So is Jordan. It's a joke. It's a joke. I mean, I just think what he did is just performative cynicism. I mean, these governments in the Gulf are just fake governments.
Yeah.
You know, they don't represent anyone but the wealthy oil barons in those countries. Qatar will do nothing. They won't retaliate. They won't do anything. You know, and again, it's worse. It's not just that the Gulf states have passively allowed these things to happen. They're supporting Israel. They're helping Israel.
Yes.
Yes. And again, Saudi Arabia and Jordan helped Israel in this attack by allowing Israel to use their airspace. So, and that happens all the time, that their airspace is used to attack Yemen, to allow Israel to attack Yemen, right? To allow Israel to attack Iran.
Yep.
I mean, there's no solidarity. There's no solidarity with their fellow Arab peoples, either in Gaza or in Syria. Again, it's just pure cynicism. And yeah, as we both, kind of shouted out during his speech, you can hear my cat running around. Sorry.
Oh, he's fine. It's fine.
Israel and the U.S. have already remade the Gulf, right? In 1973, Saudi Arabia helped lead an oil boycott of the West in defense of the Palestinians.
Right.
They will, unless there's a revolution or a very serious change in the Saudi regime, you'll never see anything like that again. They've already been remade into a total vassal of the West. And I think the Arab peoples, for their part, are ashamed of these governments, right? From Egypt to Saudi Arabia, the Arab peoples are bristling under these governments. In Jordan, which is mostly Palestinian, most of the Jordanian military is Palestinian. They can't be happy with any of this, but their governments do as they please.
When he's making this plea for other governments to help, do you think Saudi Arabia, any of these governments, is going to lend assistance? Because look, to be honest, I don't know if he's performing. Like, for all intents and purposes, he knows that the population is going to be very angry that Israel has violated their sovereignty. And on some level, they have to emote, at the very least, to show and reflect that anger, right? Trump is saying he gave him warning. He's saying Trump did not give warning, that Trump gave him warning like 10 minutes when it's too late. Okay, I don't know which one it is, right? In either case, even if Trump did give warning, he would do the exact same thing. He has to do that. Like, politically, he has to do that. He has to behave that way. Oh, I'm outraged. And then they went showing their weapon system, saying, look at our weapons. It's like, dude, you already, like, I described it on Twitter. I said, it's almost like somebody got cucked and then claimed that they didn't, and yet they have it on OnlyFans, where you can effectively see exactly what took place. Do you think Saudi Arabia or any of these governments are going to come to their aid and assistance?
No, or they wouldn't have allowed Israel to use their airspace to do what they did. I mean, of course they're not. And Qatar's not going to do anything. If they were, they'd do it already. They would have done it already. They wouldn't need this guy to stand up at a podium and talk about the things they're going to do. They would have done them. They're not going to do anything. It's sad. It's very sad.
Why do you think they're so shocked? That part got me too. Like, the media seems to be flipping out. People seem to be shocked by this. And I guess to me, it's like, we've watched them commit a genocide with impunity. Why are you shocked that they look at you in the exact same way that they look at people from Gaza or the West Bank or from Lebanon or from Syria? What makes you special?
They hate Arabs. Right. Israel hates Arabs. I mean, it doesn't matter if they're Palestinian or they're Qatari or Saudi. Yeah, there's no reason they should trust Israel. And maybe they don't deep down, but they are willing to deal with them nonetheless. It's like the line in Godfather Part 2, where Frankie Five Angels says, he criticizes Michael for dealing with Hyman Roth. And he says, and Michael says, well, my father, he did business with Hyman Roth. He respected Hyman Roth. And Frankie Five Angels says, your father did business with Hyman Roth. He respected Hyman Roth, but he never trusted Hyman Roth. And, I'm sure that
is a great line.
Yeah, the Gulf position on Israel, right? I mean, they don't trust them, but they will deal with them anyway,
You did business. He said, your dad never trusted him. You might have did business with him. You never trusted him. And what makes this even worse, Donald Trump apparently pat him on the head and said, hey, it's okay. I need you to continue negotiations. There's that, right? And then he says, and I'll make sure this doesn't happen again. So the habitual liar that
Yeah.
just lured somebody into another trap to get them murdered, you have to trust that guy to ensure your country doesn't get hit again.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
No, I mean, and you can't. I mean, you shouldn't. You know, again, it's the line, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I mean, how can people continue to be fooled? I mean, as you say, I mean, Trump is a pathological liar. Netanyahu's a pathological liar. They cannot be trusted. They can't. And you can't make a deal with them. I mean, that's the other problem. And that we've seen that throughout this war, this genocide on Gaza, that Israel doesn't abide by any deals they make. They break them the day they make them. They've done that with the war in Gaza. They've done it with the war in Lebanon. I mean, Israel's now occupying parts of southern Lebanon. That's a total violation of the peace deal with Lebanon, but they do it anyway. Again, they just can't be trusted. So there can't be a deal. I mean, just by definition, there can't be a deal, because even if you have it, it's no better than the paper it's printed on.
Yeah. I'm curious on something else. Why do you think they did this? I
was listening to an analysis this morning saying, and it was an Israeli who was talking. He actually said that, Netanyahu wanted to do this, Shin Bet wanted to do it, Mossad did not want to do it. And, he believes, and I think this is right, that this was about Netanyahu trying to prevent any type of peace deal. That is why he did it. He wants to assure there can't be a deal, because he wants to go all the way in Gaza with the final solution, which is murdering the Palestinian people there and getting rid of Hamas's negotiating team would do that. I guess Mossad, as bad as they are, they would like some kind of deal, But again, so there are divisions within the Israeli government on these sorts of things, and Netanyahu wanted to make sure peace is not possible. That's what he's doing.
But that's interesting, though. Why would Mossad be the dissenting?
The voice of reason? Well, because, I mean, there's people in Israel that understand that this war is destroying Israel, right? That it is making Israel the most reviled nation in the world. It is undermining the security of Israel for that reason, right? Because no one wants to trade with them. No one wants to be seen with them. Israeli tourists are being hounded and sometimes arrested in other countries.
Right.
And by the way, many Israeli soldiers are coming back from Gaza broken physically. All of them are coming back broken mentally. Many are committing suicide. Again, any objective, Israeli would have to say, look, yeah, we're destroying the Palestinians, but we're destroying ourselves in the process. So, of course, there's going to be people who are going to dissent on this, not because they care about the Palestinians, but because they care about the viability of Israel.
Yeah, self-preservation. Mina Uncensored, she has a Twitter account, and she said she thinks this was more about Qatar. That, for all intents and purposes, that they were complaining about, effectively, Saudi Arabia and Qatar said something like, well, unless you accept the two-state solution, then we're not going to be a part of the Abraham Accords, or threatening, well, if you take the West Bank, we're not going to be part of the Abraham Accords. And this was kind of Trump's way and Israel's way of saying, you are fair game.
Right.
And unless you want to get attacked, just like Syria, Lebanon, etc., you will bend the knee and you will join those accords in order for your own self-preservation.
That makes sense. I think that there's probably an aspect to that too. I think it's a 2-for-1 deal for Netanyahu in that regard. Yeah, I certainly think that's true. And I think, at this point, can Qatar host Hamas anymore? I wouldn't think so. you know? So, yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Well, that's the other interesting part. Like, you've tried to murder the negotiating team. Like, this is the political wing. This is not even
Right.
the military wing. Obviously, how do you have negotiations in that context? And Trump's telling Qatar, hey, I want you to continue the negotiations with Hamas. How do you do that? Like, Qatar has to know that Donald Trump gave the green light for Israel to do this. They have to know.
Of course. Well, I think Donald Trump has openly said that. I mean, I don't think it's even a secret that the U.S. gave the green light for it.
Greater Israel goes through Qatar, and if I'm not mistaken, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. You know, it does. It does. That is the dream, or the nightmare, depending on your perspective. But yeah, no, we're watching something very terrible. And again, I'm very disappointed that the world is allowing this to happen. You know, even that, you know, I don't know if you saw, there were rumors, for example, that the UN General Assembly had voted to have their September meeting in Geneva and not New York City because Trump wouldn't give visas to the Palestinian delegation. And that is what should have happened. And it's happened before.
Right.
Over Palestine. It didn't happen, though. That didn't happen. They're meeting in New York City right now. You know, the UN won't even do that. Small thing to support what is right.
But
to defend the integrity of the United Nations, right? To defend the integrity of the Palestinians. They won't even do that. They're meeting in New York this week.
Qatar has to know that this sets a precedent. Like, meaning, even if you're a vassal, your sovereignty has just been destroyed. They have a military. So they have a capability that the Palestinians didn't have, that Syria didn't necessarily have. How can they allow this? Like, meaning, even if you're a vassal, even if you accept your status as a vassal, you've just been attacked. And if you don't do anything, you've set a precedent that allowed yourself to be attacked. Meaning, if they hit you once, they can hit you again. You didn't do anything the first time around. So what's the expectation for the second time around? You would think that they are forced to respond just by definition, but you don't expect anything to come out of them in this case.
No, because of the level of their you know, of their subservience to Israel and the United States, and out of fear. I think they fear if they hit back that there'll be a worse retaliation by Israel, which is possibly true. You know, I mean, there's certainly precedent for that. So they're going to talk a big game, like you saw, and that's going to be it. And yeah, there'll be wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth, but there will not be any retaliation.
That is amazing. That is amazing. I agree with you. I thought to myself, they'll send a strongly worded letter that would be promptly thrown in the trash.
Yeah.
And I would imagine Israel looks at this and says, here's, once again, we've moved the envelope without any real response of us moving the envelope.
Yeah, no, it sends a message to Israel, right? It does, that no one's going to fight you back. I mean, and that's the problem. I mean, I think Israel has been surprised at, over the last almost 2 years. We're almost to the second year anniversary of the genocide. I think that they are surprised at how the world has let this happen. I think they thought that they would have been told no by now and stopped, and they haven't been. So the message that's been sent to them is you can do anything you want. No one's going to stop you. And that's where the world, you know, has shamed itself. Aside for a few notable exceptions, Yemen, Hezbollah, Iran. That's about it.
Do you think that this is also a message to Saudi Arabia? Like, pipe down on this whole, West Bank stuff. Pipe down on this idea of a two-state stuff. We just hit them. We will hit you too.
Sure. I mean, I think it's a message to everyone. I mean, it's always a message to everyone when you do something like this. Yeah, that there are no limits to what the U.S. and Israel would do or who they will do it to. That is the message. And it terrorizes the world, and well, you see the result of that, don't you?
Wow. That is amazing. That is amazing. Why do you think the world is flipping out like this? Like the screaming headlines? Like this, they've been committing a genocide. Why the sudden shock? Why it's almost like it felt like Qatar is in this ontological shock. Like, oh my God. It's almost like this sounds horrible, but it's like a guy slaps his wife or girlfriend for the first time. And she's just stunned by it. Like, oh, I can't believe you did that. Like, this is not our relationship. Like, this is not the way we relate to one another. I can't believe you just put your hands on me. It's that contradiction between how I see myself, what I thought I was, versus how you see me and what you're willing to do to me in the context of how you see me, and how reality kind of just breaks. It feels like that, where they felt that they were different, that the Saudis, the UAE, Qatar, that they felt like they were in this kind of different space where we're friends with the US, we're buddy. We're not like the Gazans, we're not like the Syrians, we're not like the Iranians, we're something fundamentally different. And this was their wake-up call. And they seem to be, he may be putting on a performance, but he seems legitimately shocked.
Yeah, I don't know. If they are shocked, shame on them, because this would not be the first slap. This would be the 100th slap. All right, this is not the first time this sort of thing has happened. They should know better.
Has Israel hit them before? I don't remember Israel hitting them before.
Well, I don't. For some reason, I thought they might have, but I'm not sure. But they've done all sorts of other things. I mean, again, none of this is surprising. They should, and again, the fact that Israel's doing what they're doing to the Palestinians should be message enough that,
agreed.
Again, that they are not a party you can deal with under any circumstances. But again, they persist, and they'll persist. They'll continue to deal with Israel. I don't think this even kills the Abraham Accords. I mean, again, that's the level that these countries are at. So
wow. Daniel, thank you for this. Thank you for the analysis. It's funny. I wasn't shocked by it. I was shocked that they were shocked.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's hard to be shocked anymore, right? Again, because of Gaza, you're seeing the worst things you've ever seen in your life. So how can you be shocked by this?
Yeah, exactly. That was my take on it too.
Yeah.
Dan Kovalik, man, thank you for this. Always appreciate talking to you. I always appreciate your analysis, especially on something like this, because I wasn't certain if I was being too much of a hard ass on this. Because, as I pointed out, I was like, I'm not blaming the victim in this.
Well, I think when it comes to Qatar, I think it's fair to blame them. I mean, they're a part of all this, unfortunately. Yeah.
Dan Kovalik. Dan Kovalik is a American human rights, labor rights lawyer, peace activist. He's a former professor at the University of Pittsburgh and a damn good friend of the show. Thank you for this, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure. And I have a new book out, Syria, Anatomy of a Regime Change, with a foreword by Oliver Stone. So go get it.
You got Oliver Stone to give the foreword. That's awesome.
Yes.
Do you have a copy of the cover where we can?
I do somewhere, not handy, but I can send it to you. Yeah.
Okay, just so the audience can see it for themselves.
Yes. Here, 1 second, I'll get it. Can I go get it? All right.
Yeah. Go for it. All right. He's going to get the book. Caleb, give me 1 second. I want the audience to see his book, just to give him credit for it. Dan is awesome. He is right. It's like, why are you shocked? Why did you think you were different? But on some level, I guess the Qataris did think they were different. And they got their wake-up call. Not so much. Not so much. Oh, we're back. Here we are.
That's it.
Syria, Anatomy of a Regime Change. I'm going to have to get that book. Because
Forward by
I hear
Oliver Stone. Yes.
I hear so much from people with their take on it. And it was so complicated. The way it was breaking down, you have some people who believe it was the Russians, you have some people believe it was Iranians, you have some people believe everybody was paid off. It will be in the book. It will be in the book.
I think it's the first book that I know of that is dealing with the overthrow of Assad. I mean, I think it's very timely, and I hope people go out and get it.
Think about it. You have a safe one, man. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye. All right. I'm going to bring on my man, Caleb Maupin. He is in the background. How you doing, Caleb? You doing okay today?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay. I can't complain. I'm puttering just fine. Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, author. Caleb also started the Center for Political Innovation. They have all sorts. It's an active organization. They're not a talking shop. They actually go out, do protests and everything else. Caleb, what is your latest book? Because you write books like...
Yeah, it's called Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, the whole story. And it's doing quite well. It remains a top new release on Amazon. So it tells the story of how the war hawks in Washington, D.C., the people that brought us the Bush administration, and the people that at this point seem to be at odds with our current administration, how they have roots in a break with Trotskyism in the late 1930s. So, yeah.
I brought you on for Venezuela, but there was another issue that came up that I really want your take on because I'm fast. Like, you would be a good person to break this down. Nepal. So Nepal has effectively caught on fire, and you have the parliament building being burned down. You have politicians' houses being burned down. You have the president, or the prime minister, Ali, step down. 22 people, I think it was either 19 to 22 people were killed, including the former prime minister's wife, who was burned alive in the house as they celebrated and burned the house to the ground. And all of this was started, for all intents and purposes, because social media companies didn't want to follow the laws of Nepal. And when Nepal responded to them by limiting the capability of the social media companies in Nepal, you got this massive blow up from kids, backed by an organization called Hamai Nepal. Now, this is funded in part by Coca-Cola, for one, but it's several organizations, but it's also funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, or at the very least it was funded by the National Endowment for Democracy, with this kind of organization called Free Tibet, which is obviously an anti-China organization. Now, I don't believe for a moment that the people who are out there protesting know that. By the same token, they turned around and attacked the organs of state. Now, what they were chanting was effectively corruption, grift. Their kids are looking well, but we live these difficult, desperate lives. But look at how the elites are living in the country, basically a immiseration of the poor in the country itself. And all of this stuff was effectively marshaled, mostly kids, to destroy organs of state. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because what's interesting to me is I feel that, if I'm being bluntly honest with you, when I look at, them passing a bill where they're taking $1 trillion out of healthcare in a country that barely has healthcare in order to give the rich more cash. Okay, that's angry, right? That's enraging in the way that works. When I see them going after Medicaid or Medicare, and I had a grandmother that needed Medicaid, and it was insufficient, even in the way that it was. And now they're firing people from Social Security, making people's lives that much more difficult. Like, we have a political situation that has a tenure to the actual needs of the population, which creates rage. It creates an antagonism against the organs of state. And in the same way that the people in Nepal felt that rage, and that rage was effectively taken out by destroying those organs of state, I get where they're coming from, even though let's be honest, this is somewhat of a regime change, color revolution type environment. How do you navigate that? The rage is real. The maneuvering is something different. Those kids don't know any better. From their point of view, they're getting off their frustrations at what they consider to be a distance or distinction between their life versus the life of the state that, from their point of view, has abandoned them. We feel that in America too, though. That's not something different. And yet those kids are being maneuvered for other reasons that they may not necessarily entirely be aware of. How is that maneuvered, especially since many of these kids are lefties?
Well, as you pointed out, I view this as geopolitics. When I was in Russia, I attended the World Conference of Parliamentarians, and there were a number of political leaders from Eurasia, from Kazakhstan, from various parts of the Central Asian countries, also, people from the Middle East, and many, many leaders are concerned about the mental health impact of social media, and that these countries are in very different circumstances than we're in. And here in the West, we're having big problems too. I mean, the big thing that I've seen in social media the last, 24 hours has been a call for racial profiling. And that mental health is going crazy in response to this horrendous murder that happened. And so I imagine in a developing country where there's a lot of poverty, where there's a lot of instability, the impact of social media and the concern that political leaders might have about what it could do to younger people is going to be much more, especially in a much more socially conservative society. So that's a big concern. This to me looks like, you said, like geopolitical games. Nepal is a country that, they had a monarchy for many years, and there was a Maoist communist insurgency against that monarchy. And then the king stepped down. And since the king stepped down, they've had democratic elections. The communists have done pretty well in those democratic elections, but they're not the only party. There's the Congress Party, which is kind of like, more of a mainstream, like Western party. And then there's the Maoist Communist Party that's aligned with some other communist parties too. There's a number of different communist parties. There's the United Marxist-Leninist Party. There's the Worker and Peasants Party. And that, Nepal is very close to China, and India is also on its border. And there's kind of a push and pull between India and China over Nepal. And so the Maoist communists, even though they tend to view China as not in line with their ideology, they're more like hardcore, they tend to be sympathetic to China, whereas Nepal would like to exercise some kind of control over India. And Nepal has often felt that India is trying to control them. And so Nepal is a country that is heavily contested, and there's a lot of political forces there, and they have pivoted pretty strongly into the pro-China camp. And in that context, you had this debate about social media, and now we see this rioting. And as you pointed out, brought to you by Western institutions. But that doesn't mean, as you also pointed out, that there aren't legitimate grievances that these young people have and frustrations that fueled it. But ultimately, this is being manipulated by the West. And it's funny because that's actually kind of what my book about Trotskyism kind of gets about. The neocons are very, very good at hijacking leftist sentiments to serve regime change and to spread the Western system, foment discontent against anti-imperialist governments. But yeah, I look at this and it's like, again, as you said, there are probably legitimate grievances against the government, but the main issue at hand is they want Western social media in Nepal, and they are being used by Western forces to try and bring down a government that might get in their way and has been pretty close to China and has been kind of cooperating with China. So it's a complex situation. And that doesn't mean that, something good might not come out of this. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a faction that's able to capture this and pivot Nepal in a more anti-imperialist direction. You never know. Yeah. But on the surface of this looks like a color revolution fomented by Western social media outlets to try and pivot Nepal away from China, to try and get Nepal into the U.S. camp. And it doesn't look like a good development at all.
No, it doesn't. I mean, the Victoria Nuland apparently was there a couple of years ago trying to make the case, hey, you need to side with the United States as opposed to China. You have Nepal part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So there's that. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in regards to where they were leaning, they were obviously leaning into the direction of China And China, of course, wants them for the Belt and Road Initiative and the projects associated with the Belt and Road Initiative. And I guess the catch becomes, who will be the next prime minister? Who is going to take power? And where is that guy's head going to be after they take power? So,
Yeah.
and by the way, one more thing. I was
Yeah.
there when the monarchy fell. I was in
Really?
Nepal when the king left. Yeah. I was traveling around the world. I just so happened to jump into Nepal. I was going bungee jumping. And there was this tension because they had just told the king to leave. And nobody was sure whether or not the king was going to actually leave. And the guy who ran the hotel, he was kind of giving me a breakdown of what took place. The king murdered his brother, or let's say he wasn't king at the time, but he murdered his brother. He became king. He looted the treasury, effectively robbed the country blind. Parliament finally told him to leave, and they gave him X amount of days to do so. And we were waiting, bated breath, on whether he was going to do it or whether there was going to be some kind of more aggressive response. He packed his stuff and left. Packed his stuff and left.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I mean, Nepal is interesting politically because it is very much, you know, communism was the main resistance to the king. I mean, it was the Maoist rebels. And, you know, I mean, I also understand one of the smaller communist parties in Nepal is the Worker and Peasants Party of Nepal. And they are very closely aligned with North Korea. And there is like a smaller city that they dominate, where they have big pictures of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il and such. And it's almost just like seen as like a Juche, like pro-North Korean city in Nepal. Yeah. The other thing is the major Maoist rebel group, the Communist Party of Nepal Maoist, that was waging, you know, armed struggle against the government for many years. They were at one point aligned with a communist group in the United States called the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. And I actually heard from some tourists who had been there. They told the ironic story of they were in a restaurant in Nepal, and you know, they asked, like, you know, the waiter said, "Oh, where are you from?" And they said, "America." And they said, "Oh, like Bob Avakian," referring to the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party. And they thought, what in the world is this? This is like some obscure communist guy in America. And yet in this restaurant in Nepal, like you say America, and they say, "Oh, you mean like, you know, this guy," you know, and it was just kind of like, you know, they thought it was kind of odd that, you know, and that communism is very much, I mean, Nepal, you still had at least feudal relations in the countryside. And, you know, they were waging a war kind of modeled on what Mao had done in the 1930s with the peasants rising up against the landowners, land redistribution, that kind of thing. And the rights of women was a big part of the Maoist insurgency. The Maoist communists were really into empowering women and granting women equality and such. And that, you know, and it was funny. I remember when I was in college when the king stepped down, you know, or I wasn't when the king stepped down. I think it was when they had the elections. And there were the two guys at my college that were Nepalis. And they were, when I asked them about, you know, before the king had stepped down, when it was still a monarchy, I said to them, "What do you think of the Maoists?" And they said, "Oh, they're horrible. They're terrorists," or whatever. But then after the king stepped down, I said, "What do you think of them?" And they actually they had changed their opinion. And they said, "You know what? I hope they make a better country. Maybe they'll change things," you know. And I was like, "Wow." You know, I said, "You guys have changed." And they said, "Well, things in Nepal are changing really quick," and all of that. And they were actually quite optimistic when Prachanda first took office. And I was like, "Wow, you guys have been so hostile before." And they said, "Yeah, but things are just changing very quickly." And I thought that was kind of amazing to see that they kind of changed their perspective so quickly. So I don't know. I mean, again, these are countries in the developing world where the politics are not something we can really relate to. You know, and that, you know, when we think of radical politics in America, people get interested in these kind of radical politics because they want to be trendy, because it's like a niche interest. But in a lot of these developing countries, people join nationalist political parties or communist political parties or socialist political parties or Islamic political parties because it's a matter of survival, right? They're in an area, and that is the group that is feeding people. That is the group that is offering armed protection. It's very different than how we view politics over here, you know. And a lot of times I tell people to remember that, you know, when people come to the United States, they tend to say very negative things about governments that they've come from. But you have to remember, those are people that are on one side of a war. And people that are on one side of a war tend to have that perspective. And there tend to be two sides in wars. And that we in the West, some of us that are bookish and academic, we can project our own life experience and say, well, you know, if I was living there, you know, I would be in this group. But it's not like that, right? Again, this is a matter of survival. These are people that are people that are joining a group because it offers them protection, and that a lot of times what side you're on in a civil war is based on, what region you're from, what family you're in, et cetera. It's not based on some kind of intellectual, digestion of the ideas of the people. That's one thing that it's important to keep in mind, that in a lot of ways, those of us in the West that are exploring politics, it's an intellectual exercise to us, but for people in the developing world, it's a matter of survival, and that makes the politics take on a very different dimension.
I think the thing that concerns me more than anything else is the ease at which people can be maneuvered. Because, it's not like how they feel is fake. How they feel is real. It's not like their lived experience is fake. Their lived experience is real. And many of these people are probably liberals on some level. And let's even take the liberal stuff out. From their point of view, this society should be better. And they are corrupt officials at the top. Okay, but see, from my point of view, that's the same thing here. That's the same thing in France. That's the same thing pretty much in the developing world. I don't know. I think to myself, that rage, I would be susceptible to that rage every bit as much as anybody else. I feel it now in the way that our government operates.
Well, there's a couple things that are important. First of all, the anti-corruption thing, that is a staple of Barack Obama and a staple of George Soros. They have really got that down to you hate corruption. And, what is corruption? Corruption is a vague term. It's hard to define. And especially in an impoverished country, politicians are expected to take care of their friends. And, Venezuela has had big issues in the past. And part of the problem that Venezuela had was that, when the oil money was very, very high, people didn't seem to notice. But when there was scarcity, people that were politically connected took care of their friends and relatives. And that made people that weren't politically connected quite angry. But an important thing to remember, and this is something I always point out to people, wealth is not bad. We are not anti-wealth. We're anti-poverty, right? We're anti-people getting rich by making other people poor. But wealth itself is not bad. And that, the Panama Papers and a lot of the documents that are used to kind of foment these color revolutions, they just focus on, well, this political leader, their family member has a Manhattan apartment or has a lot of money and all of that. Doesn't that make you mad? And that a lot of us on the so-called left, we're kind of trained to we hate rich people, right? Well, we don't hate rich people. No, we just are opposed to people who get rich by making other people poor. And we're opposed to an economic system where wealth and poverty walk hand in hand. We want opportunity for everyone. But if your mindset is, well, I hate rich people, all you have to do is, dump a bunch of documents showing, this politician is rich and they have a lot of wealth. Oh my God, I can't believe it. And that is kind of how it works. I saw how they took down Isabel dos Santos, who was the popular leader of Angola. And they showed that she's rich. She's very, very wealthy. But her, running of the state-run oil company in Angola led to millions of people being lifted out of poverty, facilitating, Chinese investment and building railroads. And they've replaced her with neoliberal folks that are also quite wealthy and have taken good care of themselves while they do the opposite and impoverish Angola. And that this kind of color revolution narrative, it's always, well, these leaders are so corrupt, they're taking care of themselves, so go out and riot. And then they get replaced with leaders that do what the United States wants and also enrich themselves. So, it's a game that they've learned to play. But, resentment, jealousy, envy, these are things that can't really lead to anything good, right? We can be outraged about injustice. We can be outraged about people gaining at others' expense. We can be outraged about a situation where people are being held back and held down. But we're not simply jealous of people having more wealth than others, and we're not thinking that wealth itself is inherently bad, and that those are dangerous things. When you create a mindset of the white world sucks for me, and there's somebody else for whom the world does not suck as much, so I want to take them down to make things fair. That's a really bad, unhealthy way of being. And unfortunately, in a lot of people's minds, that's what being a leftist or a socialist or a communist is, right? And that is quite dangerous. And those emotions can't really lead to anything good. And that's one thing I've learned over the years. It's just, you have to view things and in terms of what I want for myself, I want for all mankind, right? That is your attitude. And, you know, obviously you want an economic system where opportunity is available for all, where human creativity is unleashed. And that this is really, when it comes to Marx, what I get from Marx is that human beings have this brilliant ability that no other species has to make the environment serve them and to reinvent their relationship with nature to reach a higher mode of production, right? We've gone from hunter-gatherer civilization to, you know, we domesticated animals and we started growing our own crops and, you know, the Industrial Revolution and all of that. We are constantly reinventing our relationship with nature. And that right now the capitalist mode of production has an inherent problem, which is that the more wealth that's created, the poorer people get. And that is the problem, is that we shouldn't have a system where self-driving cars would be a bad thing. Self-driving cars should be a good thing. We should have a society where the fact that this chore called driving is no longer necessary leads to wealth and abundance on a higher scale. But we have a system where self-driving cars would lead to mass poverty. That's the problem, is we need a rationally organized economy to unleash human creativity so that people can go out and invent and become wealthier. We don't want to get rid of wealth. And that's a hard thing for people to wrap their minds around, because we're taught that socialism is the redistribution of wealth. It's taking from the rich and giving to the poor. Well, no, it's actually reorganizing the economic system. So the irrationality of the market is not in command.
Yes. Oh, you speak my language. No, I agree with you. I mean, like, I would make the argument that robots are there to serve, or technology is there to serve humanity. Yeah. And, you know, we have this kind of weird system where the moment that you create a technological device, human beings are competing against the device in a way that is to their detriment. You know, it's very strange. Like, it's one thing if you have a self-driving car that can get to from point A to point B. The issue is not the car. The issue is that there's going to be some individual who owns that company that is going to charge you a hell of a lot, and is going to put all of these people out of work the moment that they create this technology. No, I agree with you 1,000% on this.
Yeah, we shouldn't have a system where people can become homeless because too much food is produced, where people can become hungry because there's too much housing, right? And that's the problem in America right now. There is no housing shortage. I hear this, there's a housing shortage. There's no housing shortage. It's just too expensive. We can't afford to live in it. You know, and they've got all these mechanisms to drive the price of real estate up. While there's more demand than ever, people need places to live, but yet they continue to drive the price of rent up. And what we need more than anything, especially in the urban centers in America, I think, is we need a tax on empty housing units, right? If you're a landlord and you have empty housing units, you should have to pay a tax on that. And that would drive landlords to want to fill up their apartments. So they would lower the rent because they want to fill them up. Right now, landlords and big real estate companies, they make profit off of housing without anyone actually living there. It's like gambling on the stock exchange, right? That they buy the property and they wait for the market to change and then they sell it. And no one has to actually rent and live in the building in order to make profits. And if you lower the rent to make it affordable, that makes the property value go down, right? So they're constantly trying to figure out how they can make the buildings more expensive so they can sell them and make more money. And no one's actually living in them. You know, in New York City, we have what's called Billionaires Row. I've done stories on it. The most expensive apartment buildings in the world. And the tragedy of them is that nobody lives in them. They're empty. I mean, it's like, you know, like they're almost half empty. These huge towers, these luxury buildings, and at least half of the units, nobody lives in them, because who can afford $2 million a month in rent? Nobody, right? And it's like this is a crime. Why do we have these huge luxury apartment buildings empty when we have all kinds of people in this city who are struggling to put together, you know, $2,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens or in the Bronx or something? I mean, it's just absolutely wrong, and it doesn't fit the market, right? And the market model is supposed to be supply and demand. If there's people that need housing, the prices should go down because there's more demand. But it's been rigged through real estate speculation to not deliver what the consumer wants.
I'm curious on something else. I think, look, I agree with you about the wealth thing, but I think people inherently know that somebody else has, or the reason that I don't have on some level is because somebody else has. Like that, it's not a one-to-one. It's not like this person has billions and this other person can also have billions. It's this person has billions because I don't have. And people make that relationship. As you point out, it's the way the system effectively works. It creates an alienation with the government itself. Like it creates this kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? This hatred, this anger at a particular system and the way the system operates. And I think what we're seeing in Nepal is people taking that rage and that frustration out on these buildings, on these levers of government that from their point of view, they're A, alienated from, and B, blamed for the situation that they found themselves in regards to the difficulty to which they're experiencing. Why do you think that hasn't happened in the States?
Well, I mean, it has. I mean, they've staged these kind of things. I was part of Occupy Wall Street, and that very much came from above, no question about it. I mean, that was, I had been part of smaller demonstrations before, like Bloombergville, which was like kind of the rehearsal for Occupy Wall Street that got almost no publicity. That was like we'd occupied a lower part of Manhattan in response to Bloomberg's budget cuts in New York City. But Occupy Wall Street was very much, it was the National Endowment for Democracy. It was the George Soros people, and they staged a protest. But, we were able to go into it, and I met a lot of people who got politically active for the first time during Occupy Wall Street. And that's to say, sometimes things can go in a different direction. Fomenting dissent and unrest is kind of playing with fire to some degree or other. And I, think of great examples. For example, when Fidel Castro first came to power, the CIA was backing him. Right. At first, they opposed him and they supported Batista. But then when it became clear he was going to win, the USA started supporting him, actually. And they pivoted towards supporting him. And they thought, OK, this guy will, he'll be our guy. And, maybe we just need to reform things in Cuba. But then when it became clear, he was going to pivot towards supporting the Soviet Union, then they turned against him. But, the Houthis, I have my book on the Houthis. The turning point for the Houthis was the Arab Spring, right? Which was, we also know, was fomented by the U.S. government, was fomented by the National Endowment for Democracy. But Yemen's a very corrupt country, and they had been this religious fanatical group that controlled certain territories and had militias. But then there was the Arab Spring, which was this kind of anti-corruption uprising. But the Houthis were able to start providing security for the protesters during the Arab Spring. And they won over a lot of the more liberal people in the country who didn't agree with them religiously by being there like security guards and protecting them during the Arab Spring protests. And now the Houthis run Yemen. So sometimes you can have like a color revolution that they kind of lose control over. Right. And that happens too. Right. And who knows? I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't look good in Nepal right now, but who's to say that, this unrest might lead to a situation where some anti-imperialist force could get control of the unrest and take it in a good direction. These things happen. In Iran a couple of years ago, there was a protest movement that started out as legit grievances against the reforms. It was against banking. They have liberalized their banking system in Iran to some degree or other. And then, there was some people that lost their money or whatever. And so there was like a protest, and the protest was not against the Islamic Republic. It was demanding that the Islamic Republic be pure to its kind of anti-capitalist principles, not capitalism, but Islam. But then the anti-regime forces, backed by the United States, they all jumped in and made it about opposing the Iranian government, supporting the United States. And then they were able to calm things down. And then the hardliners in Iran did have big actions, demonstrations as things calm down, kind of reinforcing, that the Islamic Republic takes care of the poor and such. And so it's not always a done deal. And that sometimes these unrest situations start out as something the imperialists foment for their own reasons, but then they go in another direction. And that's important to keep in mind as well. So it's complicated. I think that the main thing, though, that to remember is that right now, it almost seems like the forces in the developing world that are anti-imperialist, they almost have a conservatism to them. They're offering stability. They're saying, we will control the means of production and rationally organize the economy and make sure that living standards keep going up. But they're also saying we won't bring in all that chaos from the West, right?
Right.
We're going to protect the traditional family. We're going to, keep things stable. And so it's almost like socialism, communism, anti-imperialism has this kind of conservative edge to it, whereas the kind of the radical aesthetic, the red flag and the anger and the tear it down, that has become kind of the tool of the West, and it's fomented with social media. And that's kind of an interesting development. And I traced that over the course of the Cold War. You can see that kind of gradually became the case, whereas, the Trotskyists, they were all about permanent revolution, and the Soviet Union kind of pivoted away from how they saw things, and they eventually ended up with the CIA, whereas socialism in one country, which was Stalin's vision, and eventually socialism with Chinese characteristics and Deng Xiaoping, and that socialism gradually got more and more conservative as the Cold War went on, actual existing socialism, whereas leftism in the West became less and less anti-imperialist and more associated with, just kind of that radical aesthetic that ended up serving imperialism. And that's something I've written about quite a bit, that there's almost two souls of socialism. On the one hand, you have the the radical intellectual who wants chaos and is angry at injustice. On the other hand, you have the bulk of the population that wants stability and become radicalized when their life is intolerable, and they're revolting because they want stability, because their life has just gotten so intolerable. They want stability, and they turn to socialists and radicals because they will promise to bring stability. I mean, the Russian Revolution promised what? Peace, land, and bread.
Right.
Yep. And that in China it was land to the tiller. They were going to give land to the peasant. And that in a lot of cases, the actual demands that revolutionary governments come to power on the basis of are quite modest and moderate. I often will point to, North Korea, when they took power, when the Korean Workers' Party took power, Kim Il-sung, I have the works of Kim Il-sung. There's a radio speech that Kim Il-sung gave when they announced that the Korean Workers' Party was coming to power. And he announced what they were for. And if you look at it, it's a very, very modest set of demands. It's not the most radical thing. He said, punish those who collaborated with Japan during the Second World War, create a national healthcare system, ensure freedom of religion, create movie theaters in rural areas where people can go to the movies. It's not the most radical thing. He's not promising I'm going to build some communist utopia. He's saying, here's some pretty basic things, but it was those basic things that brought them to power, right? And that the situation on the Korean Peninsula when Japan was occupying it and afterwards, they weren't getting that. There wasn't a universal public education system. There wasn't healthcare, and Kim Il-sung was saying, look, I can offer this. And the 14-point plan that the Korean Workers' Party had when they took power was very, very moderate, but it led to the North Korean government coming into power.
Wow. Caleb, I'm sorry we ended up being diverted for the Nepal thing, because
that's okay.
It was just on the marquee, and it was I was very curious about your take on it, especially with your political leanings on the way the protests and everything else and how you process that. I was just interested in your take on that. So thank you for this.
Sure.
Much appreciated, man. Caleb Maupin. Caleb Maupin is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst. He is creator of Center for Political Innovation. Definitely check them out. They're very active political organization. And one more time, Caleb, what is your latest book so the audience can see it?
Trotsky and the Neoconservatives, the whole story. So yeah, check it out.
Badass, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. You be safe.
Yeah. Always fun. Yep. Thanks.
Bye-bye. All right. Caleb Maupin. Caleb is awesome. I swear you can hit the man about anything. And we have one last guest for today, David Hundeyin.
Afternoon.
Did I get that right? David Hundeyin. Hundeyin. Okay, it's the A, not an E. Hundeyin. I need to write that down phonetically. He is investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and is the 2023 James Carey Fellow at Cambridge University. David, thanks for joining me, man. How you doing this morning? Well, wait a minute. Where are you located around the globe, by the way?
I'm somewhere on the African continent. That's
okay.
That's as far as that's as much as I will disclose.
Fair enough. I accept that. I do accept that. I was only asking for time zone reasons. I don't know if it's evening or morning where you are. Okay.
It's afternoon. Sorry.
Okay, afternoon. Okay, fair enough. It's nighttime here, and so I have no idea. The time zones are always a pain in my ass. No, man. Thank you for joining me. You doing okay this afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay. I want. So let's learn some about Africa. Fair enough. I was looking at some of the stories that were bubbling up on the continent. And one of the stories I think we hit last time had to do with China's influence and Russia's influence in Africa. What is the U.S. influence? I mean, they have things like AFRICOM. They have things like they build military bases and those type of things. One of my guests had this book where she was talking about the way in which the U.S. was operating in Africa and those type of items. Is it just military bases? Is it just subversive tactics? Like, what is our role in the way that we engage with the African continent?
So if you're familiar with something called the whole of society approach, which is very much an American creation. It's an American concept where, for lack of a better term, you could describe it as a refined, turbocharged form of colonialism, where essentially the entirety of a society at every level, is hijacked or weaponized to suit American goals. So that may not necessarily mean conflict, but it means that at every level of society, the society is not working primarily toward the goals of its own interests, but toward the interests of the U.S. government. So, I'm not going to speak for the whole of Africa. I'm going to speak for Nigeria, which is like a microcosm of Africa. Obviously, it's the largest, the most populated country in Africa. The techniques used here are scaled across the continent. So, for example, the media and civil society space in Nigeria, which you may or may not know, is almost entirely dominated by US interests and to a lesser extent British and European interests, but mostly US interests. So the so-called independent media, right, the big independent online platforms, when you check the funding, you see names like Ford Foundation, you see names like MacArthur Foundation, you see names like the Open Society Foundation, you see names like the Media Network, you see names like the Gates Foundation, you see names like the Rockefeller Foundation.
Yeah.
You know, which all these names I've just mentioned, I don't think it's quite well known, basically, that these are all essentially U.S. intelligence fronts,
Right.
without exception. These entities control the entirety of Nigeria's civil society space and a very large portion of its information space. And it's not just sort of under the table, subtle stuff. Sometimes it's a lot more open and aggressive. So if you look through the WikiLeaks cables, which is one of my favorite things to do, by the way, I just sometimes go to the WikiLeaks database and just type a keyword Nigeria and just, what new thing am I going to discover this time?
Yeah.
One of the things that I discovered last year was this was a cable that was published sometime in 2000. That was sent in 2007, and I have no reason to doubt that such programs still exist now. And it was essentially a staffer at the U.S. Embassy writing a cable to the State Department and boasting that a Nigerian journalist working at the state-owned radio station in Nigeria, Voice of Nigeria, had been essentially captured by the U.S. State Department. So the journalist was described in the cable as State Department sponsored journalist Buhari Awal.
Really?
Yeah. So apparently this guy had been given money, given inducements, he had been given a visa to visit the US. He had an all expenses paid trip to Washington, D.C., which, as you can imagine, might be a big deal for someone who was born in Kaduna and has probably never left, probably doesn't have a passport, probably never left Nigeria before. All of a sudden, this foreign government is coming in and whining and dining him on the other side of the planet. So that's a very big deal. And as a result of that partnership, they said that apparently in that instance, the goal of that partnership was to get him to influence the coverage on Voice of Nigeria of the US government, basically to create positive coverage of the US government and its policies, particularly toward Muslims. And the context then was obviously northern Nigeria is heavily dominated by Muslims. And in the aftermath of the September 11 attacks and then the resultant wars in the Middle East, there was a lot of anti-American sentiment in northern Nigeria. So his job was basically to roll back the tide of that sentiment by creating sort of, for lack of a better term, pro-US propaganda, which he did. And the only reason we're talking about this is because some staffer in the US Embassy happened to boast about it in a cable. So how many thousands of times have such things happened in Nigeria's information space that didn't go into a diplomatic cable and no one knows about it? So it's individual journalists, it's entire media platforms, it's even the regulation and the legal frameworks that govern not just the information space, but other spaces like healthcare, like agriculture. It's very often the case that these very actors, these what people call NGOs, but which are really a sort of shadow government, really, because these entities are sometimes even more powerful than an actual state. These entities have direct access to everybody in power in Nigeria. So there was a video report that I did a few weeks ago. This was focused on the food space, right? But this is emblematic of something else that happens across the Nigerian regulatory space. So during the National Assembly's open week, there was supposed to be a public engagement, a stakeholder engagement session regarding food law in Nigeria.
Okay. Like Big Ag.
Essentially, yeah. So the idea of the idea behind the session supposedly was, now that there's this whole debate about whether GMOs should be approved or should not be approved, there should be a public discussion. Stakeholders from all parts of the food value chain and the regulators should sit around a table and have an honest conversation about this, which will obviously influence policy, which sounds like a great idea.
Right.
But then, so I got hold of the program that had the list of people who made up the people on that table. So there were 9 people. 2 of them were senators, so lawmakers, and the other 7 were people from private institutions, from, supposedly representing farmers, representing the biotech industry, representing consumers, representing the different parts of the stakeholder circle, right? And what I was able to establish by simply digging into the background, this didn't take a lot of research, by the way. This took like 30 seconds of research in each case. And I was able to establish that those 7 people who were supposedly stakeholders having an honest conversation about food policy in Nigeria, every single one of them worked for an entity that was directly funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Are you serious?
Yes. So essentially, that was not public debate at all. That was an astroturfed, scripted conversation with a defined endpoint, with a predetermined endpoint in mind, which is obviously that GMOs are safe, GMOs are fine, please approve them in Nigeria, there's no problem with them. Because obviously Bill Gates has a financial interest in pushing GMOs, especially on parts of the world which have sort of weaker regulatory environments like Nigeria and Africa. So if that has been done in the food space, imagine the similar things that have happened in the health space. Imagine the similar things. I remember the last time we had a conversation and I spoke about how there was a constitutional amendment that was being proposed, where a citizenship by investment program, which nobody asked for and which makes no sense in the context of Nigeria, was suddenly being pushed into law for no apparent reason. These are the things that happen in the background, and when you do some digging, it shows up almost without fail that there's always an American entity behind it. More often than not, it's not the U.S. embassy, like directly, but it's one of these, shadow institutions. So there's this, what I find particularly insidious and dismaying about it is that they've perfected this art of this thing called plausible deniability, where you are the protagonist, but you've created this veil around you. So the Ford Foundation is the name that you see there. The Gates Foundation is the name that you see there. The MacArthur Foundation is the name that you see there. The Open Society Foundation is the name you see there. To most people, these are just charitable organizations. These are just non-profit charities, non-organizations. In reality, first of all, these are not non-governmental organizations at all, because they're very, very governmental, right? They're funded by the government, right? So if you're familiar with what the former State Department official Mike Pence refers to as a GONGO, as government organized NGO, that's what these organizations actually are. So they're not charitable, they're not non-governmental, and they're not benign. They all have economic and political agendas that they're tasked with pursuing. But most people do not know this. So that is a challenge I have run to in the course of even trying to educate the public about the shared danger that exists where your regulatory space and your information space which I think are the two most important spaces in the public life of a country. Those spaces are being dominated by a foreign government. And most people don't understand that this is a foreign government. Most people just see it as an NGO. An NGO is just this abstract thing that's just hanging in the air without context to most people, right? Most people don't understand, especially in this part of the world where there's this idea that charity is a thing. So you are coming from America, so the culture you exist in, you are probably more cognizant of the fact that charity isn't really a thing. Nothing really goes for nothing. There's
Right.
always a string
String
attached
attached.
somewhere.
Yeah.
But culturally, in this part of the world, the level of awareness is not the same. Because culturally, there is the concept of just abstract charity is very much a thing. So when someone like me, or plenty of other people in my space, try to raise the alarm and raise the issue that these charities, these NGOs are not benign. They're not looking to act in your best interest. They're not trying to do good for you. They're not trying to make the world a better place. They're simply pursuing specific political and economic agendas. People don't understand it,
They don't see it.
right? So, yeah, so that actually is where I think the US government has perfected this art of hiding behind a fig leaf and sort of carrying out all sorts of economic and political agendas in other people's countries in plain sight. And partly because culturally people are not used to or familiar with that level of deviousness. So they don't even know what they're looking at. They don't realize what they're dealing with and the danger that it represents. And also because these are very, very, very well funded and very generous organizations. So it's well known in the Nigerian information space, for example, that if you're trying to make a good living, for example, as a journalist, then you want to work in and around one of these sort of NGO funded newsrooms. You don't want to work with a legacy newsroom because everybody knows there's no money there. Those guys mostly make their money either from government or the little advertising revenue there is to be had. You and I know that advertising revenue doesn't really run media because advertising revenue doesn't make a dent in the budget. It doesn't do anything. So those guys are poor, basically. So if you're a young journalist and you have ambition, you want to live in a nice place, you want to buy a car, maybe you want to get married someday, have a family, you know that there's really no future for you with the legacy media. So you're looking toward the newish online stuff, which is almost entirely US funded. So knowing that this is where your bread is buttered, it's very unlikely that even if you eventually figure out that you are acting on behalf of someone else's geopolitical interests, which may not be in your country's interest, even if you eventually figure that out, the calculation that many people, including people that I know, have made is that, well, I didn't create this situation. I'm just one person. I'm just trying to survive. This world is much bigger than me, and this is just a system that exists. So what can
And if I don't do it, somebody else will do it.
Exactly. So I'm just trying to take care of my family. So it's not. I'm going to strategically close my eyes to this and pretend not to be aware of what I'm doing and who I'm helping.
Interesting. I'm curious, how does one of the most interesting things to me, the Sahel states, do you see them, because they've broken that model. I mean, they've fundamentally broken that model. I mean, and Traore talks about it all the time, this idea that we need to be able to control our information space. We need to be able to control how our countries, how we see ourselves. Like we can't look at ourselves through the lens of, let's say, a Western government. We need to see ourselves through our own lens, through our own experience. Do you see that being infectious to the rest of Africa? I mean, those states have effectively tried a new model. And if that model works, is that something that you see propagating? Has it had influence on other parts of Africa beyond the West Africa?
So in terms of the information strategy of the Sahel states, I don't think it's had that influence yet. And the simple reason is that the other side is still a lot more resourced. There's still a lot more money on the other side. So the other side is still able to scream its narrative much louder than the Sahelians can. So maybe internally they've been able to control their information space, but what they've not been able to do successfully is project that internationally. So you still have your Western narratives still being trumpeted across the region almost by force. So it's got to the point now where they're actually going through the supposedly local actors, these NGO funded media, specifically in Nigeria, are being used almost on a weekly basis. There's a new hit piece coming out about the Sahel, right? And you can tell that even though it's a Nigerian, even though it's a Nigerian name on the article, you can tell that this wasn't this person's idea, because some of these people, I know them in person, and I know that you didn't really write this article. And if you did so under duress.
Wait. Are you telling me that they would have, let's say, Bob Cobb's name on it? And it's like, I know Bob Cobb. Bob Cobb would have never written this article. Wow.
Yeah, this person actually admires Ibrahim Traore. I know this colloquially. However, this person is writing this article where he's describing him as this horrible dictator. There's an atmosphere of fear in Burkina Faso, and I know that this was not of your own originality. Somebody made you do this. And you're probably doing this to keep the lights on at home. You're probably doing this to pay the bills, pay your children's school fees. I mean, I'm going to be honest enough and say I don't respect it, because I still believe that no matter what, you have a choice. But I understand why people do those things. But the point is, for the time being, those things are still happening because the imperialist persuasion still has a lot more money and reach than the Sahelians. When that will change is when the Sahelian countries, I mean, it started happening, but it hasn't reached that critical mass yet. When it will change, when the Sahelian countries start being sort of unignorable in terms of their physical development, in terms of,
I see.
You know, people visit and they're like, okay, this place is just way much nicer than where I'm coming from. So if you take a flight from Lagos to Ouagadougou and you're like, wow, these people are just living way, way better. This is a much better structured system. This is a much healthier society. And these people have a better way of doing things than we do. When that starts to happen, the sort of word of mouth virality is much, much more powerful than whatever media narrative can be trumpeted and, you know, parachuted in from Washington, D.C. So I think, again, that's a problem that time will solve. Right now, they haven't reached that critical mass yet because, for example, in the case of Burkina Faso, they're basically constructing a country from scratch.
Right.
Like they're basically building the entire infrastructure stock of a country from scratch. So I think it's going to be another 5 to 7 years before, you know, the benefits of all the things that are being done now will start compounding. But I think it will happen. It's just that it's not going to be sort of short-term and visually spectacular event. It's going to be sort of a slow burner. But when it happens, and it's going to be irreversible.
But the other countries have to see that A, they're taking control of their resources. B, they're using those resources for the betterment of their own population. And C, in comparison, those countries don't have control in the way that the Sahel states have control. Like, I'm not saying the states are looking at themselves to say, hey, we need to have an overthrow of the government, but the populations have to be able to see that and say to themselves, maybe there's a better way to do this. Meaning if Africa wants, as a continent, wants to, let's say, regain control of itself, that on some level, they're going to have to deal with that monster of a democratic system that is that is imposed in order to create a more authoritarian system, despite the fig leaf of democracy.
Exactly. But what you need to understand about most African countries, and I can definitely speak from a place of authority here, is that part of this long-term project of exerting control over the information and civil society spaces in those countries is that there has been this social conditioning and social engineering that has made people fundamentally question whether even the concept of sovereignty and control is even necessary. right? There's
Whoa.
been a lot of these
Are you
parachuted
serious?
narratives. Yes. So there have been a lot of these narratives parachuted in from DC and from London and from Paris that essentially anyone who is any African leader who is talking about sovereignty, resource nationalism, regaining control, taking a greater share of natural resource revenues from foreign mining entities and all of that, that somehow those are the discussions of a banana republic. Somehow those are things to be looked down on. That if you want to be thought of as modern and forward-looking in the sort of approved Western, intellectual sense, then you should be talking about things that maybe things like AI, things that in your reality are basically abstract, right? Because when you come from a country where 40% of school children don't have access to an all-weather road, 30-something% of the population has never had electricity before. And the electricity that exists is very unreliable, and it's like 6,000 megawatts for 200 million people. When you come from that kind of from that kind of country, the problems that you have are fundamentally not the problems that someone from Switzerland has, but they want you to think like you are someone from Switzerland.
I see.
Right? So you get rewarded for thinking and behaving as though you live in a different place to where you actually live, as though you exist in different contexts to the one you actually exist in. So people who talk about the issues that actually matter, their voices get sort of, suppressed. If you're working in the information space, which I think like the information space is central to all of this, because even the civil society space works hand in glove with the information space to spread these narratives. When I say information space, I'm not just referring to journalism, I'm referring to social media, I'm referring to pop culture, all kinds of things that shape culture in the country. There's been this effort over decades to sort of marginalize the importance of those things that you just described. So, for example, in 2023, when the coup took place in Niger, and the new government of General Abdurrahman Chiani started talking about how France has been mining uranium in Niger for over 40 years, and Niger still has like 20-something% of the population that has access to electricity. It's one of the least electrified places in the world, and at the time was the second poorest country in the world by GDP. So when he was talking about these things, like the reaction from the Nigerian intelligentsia and the West African intelligentsia was, oh my God, one of these Kwame Nkrumah Pan-Africanist types. Oh dear Lord,
Are you
it's kind
serious?
of you get this sort of eye-rolling reaction.
Niger blind.
And
I mean, like
they
were paying like $2 or something insane.
Yeah, exactly. They were getting robbed, absolutely robbed. But the intellectual paradigm that has been imposed on the West African or the African intelligentsia is that you're not supposed to think about that. That's not a problem for you to worry about. No, you should worry about abstract things. Talk about gay rights, right? Like people's kids don't have food to eat, but talk about transgender rights. Attend conferences in Berlin with your European friends and talk as if you exist in the same context that they do. Talk as if you share the same problems, which you absolutely do not, right? But basically disconnect yourself from your own reality and plug yourself into a European or an American abstraction, and you'll be rewarded for that. So if you consciously decide to focus on your actual problems, the actual problems that face your society, and this was an experience that I had. I'm not proud of this, but I'll just put it out there because there was a point I was actually captured, not financially but intellectually, by that idea that somehow Africa has transcended those conversations. Somehow Africa is supposed to be talking about these other things, talking about the fourth and fifth industrial revolution when you've not had the third industrial revolution yet, talking about AI revolution and, basically trying to show the world that you exist at the same intellectual level that they do, as though you get a cookie or a pat on the head for that. I was once captured by that paradigm. As recently as 2020, I delivered a TED talk. I was living in Nigeria at the time, a TEDx talk. And in that TED talk, my premise was essentially that Africa needs to stop talking about resources. Africa needs to do away with the concept of resource nationalism, that Africa's resources are not really as important as we think they are to the world, that essentially African people need to, I'm going to sort of sum it up very crudely because I said a lot more than this, but essentially a boiled down version of what I was saying was everybody should go learn to code. Right. Which in hindsight, like I've actually tried to get that talk taken down because I'm so ashamed of it now in hindsight, because looking at I feel so much embarrassment at how intellectually captured I was at the time, that I was sitting in the middle of a city of 21 million people, that's Lagos, the largest city in Africa, and I was getting roughly 6 hours of electricity a day, right? If you stepped out of where I lived and you walked for 15 minutes, you'd see a slum, like the most stereotypical African slum with incredible, mind-bending poverty. And I wasn't looking at those things as the issues I should be worried about. And I was rather, trying to appeal, I guess, to a European audience, like, African resources and all that. African resource nationalism isn't a thing that Africans should be concerned about. It's an idea from the 50s. It's an independence era idea. It's been 60 years since independence. We're supposed to have moved on,
Right.
And these are narratives that have been very deliberately pushed on the African intelligentsia, that the fact that it's been 60 years since independence somehow means that fundamentally something has changed and Africa has moved on and things are different now. They categorically are not. Nothing has changed. The economic dynamic that existed in 1960 still exists today. The only difference is we have TikTok, right, to talk about it on. Fundamentally, the economic and political dynamics that make Africa what it is have not changed at all since the 19th century. So I guess it takes, I guess you need to have a sort of come to Jesus moment, like a wake up moment like I had, when you eventually start to question some of your more sort of foundational assumptions.
Yeah.
Right. So when I started to fundamentally question these assumptions was when there were several times when I had these moments, but for me, one of my biggest moments was when I happened to speak to someone who is involved in the commodities business, shall we say, in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Mm-hmm.
And the things I heard were in direct conflict with every assumption that I had, because the assumptions I had were that the problems in DR Congo were basically driven by greedy African warlords who were trying to profit off of minerals. And it's like they were looking for easy money, basically. That's the narrative I had been fed. That was the easy thing. And this person I was speaking to, who, by the way, happens to be American, made it very clear that the actual warlords, the locals in DR Congo, they don't really know what's going on and they're not part of the game. There's a huge international, for lack of a better term, conspiracy to ensure that DR Congo forever remains mired in conflict. And such and such and such is what is happening. So and so and so is where this is. I was stunned to find out, for example, that there's a city called Kivu in the eastern DRC, right? Kivu is, by GDP, it's a very poor place. It's not, there's nothing. Sorry, not Kivu. Kivu is the name of the region. The city is called Goma, right? Goma is a poor city. There's nothing spectacular about it. Apparently, Goma has the busiest airspace on the entire continent of Africa. Why would this unspectacular mid-sized city that just so happens to be located next to a mining hotspot, where every kind of desirable mineral in existence can be found, why does this place have the busiest airspace in Africa? And then you do some more digging into it, and you discover that most of these aircraft, they're not. You can't even track them. Some of them, they fly with their transponders off. Why would an aircraft do that? You know, and little by little, you start to realize the enormity of what you're actually looking at. That the curated version of reality that has been fed to you by the sort of Western-controlled information space that has been imposed on you is fundamentally not true at all. And that if you want to know the reality of what is happening, even on your continent, you have to go out into the field and actually talk to people, take pictures, do actual journalism work. You can't just sit in front of a computer and read World Bank reports, because a lot of what is written there is complete nonsense.
Wow. David, that is fascinating. Like, I gotta be honest, this is like, I don't know if the audience knows the stuff. And that's why I enjoy these conversations, because it's illuminating. It fills us in on a context that there's no way for us to have because we don't live in the region.
Yeah.
Wow. David, you're fantastic. I swear to God, man, my mind is blown every time we have a conversation. And it makes me realize how much more we should be having conversations about what's going on. And personally, I like to talk about everywhere in the world. But these conversations are fascinating. And some of this stuff I would have just never known. Like, I know that we try to control information space in other countries. The degree to which we have that level of influence and control in this kind of naked, hegemonic way is just mind-blowing. The way cultivating minds.
Academia as well.
Yeah. Brian Berletic hits this too, where Brian Berletic talks about this notion of controlling information space and how you know, you can have all the weapons in the world, but if you have a country that doesn't want to use them, or that is catering to an interest that is not in their own best interest, then the weapons are not really going to matter. You have to be able to control what the public thinks, especially about itself. Wow. David, thank you for this. I always appreciate these conversations. I really do. David Hundeyin. I want to make sure I got that right. I don't want to fuck. Okay.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, David Hundeyin. He is investigative journalist, author, filmmaker, founder of West Africa Weekly, and the 2023 James Curry Fellow at Cambridge University. Dude, like I said, I'm illuminated every time we talk. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You be safe. Thanks.
All
right. We have come to the end. I love that conversation. That's stuff you never really know. We have this guy, Ken Delanian, if you remember. Ken Delanian was a CIA spook who was working for LA Times and getting his stories vetted by the CIA. But this goes beyond that. Like, this goes into efforts to basically control minds. What is in your best interest, even though it's not. What you're allowed to talk about. How you should think about stuff. Yeah, that's a level of control that's breathtaking. All right. I am beginning to drag ass. So let's go to the chat. Black Spock. Love that name. Super sticker. Thank you, Black Spock. Much appreciated. Days in Redden. No country has the right to say anything about any country after no critique of Germany or Israel. I don't quite understand that one. No country has the right to say anything about any country after this. No critique of Germany or Israel. Well, I think at this point, Israel is a pariah. Now, if you mean the leadership of countries, yeah, those people are sociopaths. And they, of course, back their colony of squatters. Germany is different because the realization that I had, and this is grim, is that if the Germans, Nazis, just did the Holocaust without invading other countries, nobody would have cared. They would have allowed them to burn and run the ovens. They would have allowed this stuff to take place. It was the fact that we were at war with Germany that created that context where Not only did we win the war, but we also need to show that these people were monsters. They may use the term never again, but that's just what they say. In reality, countries are realists. And those realist countries make decisions about what's in their best interests for them. It's not about, hey, there's a genocide over there. Yeah, that sucks. And we may send a strongly worded statement about it. But do we need to leverage human capital? Do we need to risk lives? Do we need to risk our financial sense? Well, if any of those things are true, then none of those things are going to take place in regards to action towards doing anything. I know this sounds horrible, but I think if you look around, it's true. Pittsburgh Dude 87. Tell Dan I'm writing him for the Pittsburgh mayor. I'm writing him in for Pittsburgh mayor. I will tell Dan that. Wanda USA. Jamal, turn the AC on so we can hear if it's too loud. Didn't sound loud earlier. Oh, because I'm sweating bullets, because I'm sweating like James Brown. I'll try it, Wendy. I'll try it. Sometimes I open the door, but when they're doing the prayers, you can, like, it's very loud. I could hear it even when the door and everything else is shut. But Wendy, thank you for caring about my well-being. Thank you for that. You have no idea how much I care about that. Thank you for that. Nepal is perfectly located between India and China with a leverage point similar to Azerbaijan is located between Russia and Iran. Yes. And if Azerbaijan keep messing around, they're going to F around and find out. Matlax X, what the fuck is Saudi Arabia complaining about? Israel had to use their airspace. I assume they allowed Israel to do it. Well, yeah. I mean, I think Dan Kovalik said the same thing, right? That, well, they had to use their airspace in order to do it. That's the wild part. And then they would turn around and say, oh, we're with you, all the way. Dastardly Israel. How dare they do that to you? And then they would have their Krispy Kreme donuts delivered and sit there with their feet up, eating bonbons and Krispy Kremes. Yeah. There's going to be all sorts of fire and fury, which is going to signify absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. All right. We have come to the end. I guess I'm dragging ass. So I'm going to close this out a little bit sooner, as opposed to just kind of sitting around chatting with the audience. We've had a decent show today. Shout out to David for coming on a bit later. Yeah, and thank you all. I got to be honest, I'm always insecure carrying the show. Always insecure. People like Sabby Sabs, Kim Iverson, they are so, I guess, accustomed to just kind of, they may have an hour where they're just carrying the show. It's just normal, where they're doing segment after segment after segment. That freaks me out, especially since I don't think anybody cares about me doing segments. But we had like 1,000 people here during those segments. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we should do more of those. We'll see. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. Oh, we have one more super chat. Wanda USA. Turn it on now. We can vote on it. Okay. All right. The AC is on. If it's loud, you can make your votes. As Wanda said, we can vote on it, whether it's too loud. Let's see. All right, let me know. You doing all right, Jamal? Oh, well, thank you for that. Foreign Policy Matters. I appreciate it. I thank everyone for being here. Mama Thomas, shout out to you. You rock too much. You rock too much to be insecure. Oh, thank you, Alexandra Black. I appreciate that. Just doing doing what the hen do the best they can do. I can't hear it. Okay, so y'all can't hear the AC. You can't hear it. Can't hear it. Karma selection M3 can't hear it. Select M3 can't hear it. Okay, well, all right. Well, fair enough. I won't be sitting here sweating bullets. Africa One Fist can't hear it. Jazzy. Jonah, not a whisper. German. Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Fair enough. If you guys can't hear it, fair enough. I won't sit here and just sweat bullets. It's like, why is he sweating like James Brown like that? Yeah, it gets hot. It gets hot. 3-1 Atlas Space. Dookie. What? Child of God, you have no right to shut up any. Was it child of God? Oh, there's a person named Child of God. Fair enough. I'm Charles G. It's 3-1 Atlas Space Dookie shaped like a mamu. It's weird. Like that I know what's his name is wilding out when he's like, this is an alien weapon sent to something. But it is very strange. The for one, it's coming outside of our solar system. Its approach is almost like it's surveying our entire solar system. It's very strange. And it's going past Mars, it's going past all these other planets. And then by the time it gets to Earth, it's behind another planet or behind the sun. So we can't see it. It's very strange. It's very, very strange. All right. We've come to the end. We've come to the end. I want to thank all of you for joining me. I have no idea how I'm going to cut these videos. I've created a contradiction that I fucked up. You can't do 2 videos on the same topic. So talking to Caleb about Nepal means it has to be Caleb on Nepal. Talking to Dan on Qatar means, unless there's another angle for it. Yeah, I need to think about it. I think through it. You guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Colonel Wilkerson and Dennis Fitz should be here tomorrow. Sarah Bills will be here tomorrow. I'm trying to get Anna Guh. She is in Norway, but maybe she can still join us. Otherwise, I'm going to have to find somebody for the morning slot. You guys have a fantastic day. Enjoy your day. Be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Yes, I always put a qualifier on it because sometimes people are assholes. You kind of just have to handle your business. But to the degree that you can be a good person, try to be one. Be safe. Have a good one, guys.